Our story opens on an exceptionally hot evening in early July in the city of St. Petersburg. It's a city that seems to sweat and groan under the weight of the summer sun. The atmosphere in the neighborhood surrounding the Haymarket is almost unbreathable, a cocktail of stench from the canals, the thick dust of the streets, and the ever-present odor of the taverns that spill their patrons onto the sidewalks. This is a city of crushing poverty and suffocating proximity, where every staircase smells of refuse and every courtyard is a well of drunken shouts and quiet despair. It's a landscape that is not merely a backdrop, but an active participant in our story, a physical manifestation of the confusion, claustrophobia, and moral decay that plagues its inhabitants. It is from a garret room in one of these towering, five-storied tenements that a young man emerges. He is Rodion Romanovich Rascalnikov, a former student, and he steps out into the street with a look of profound, irritable anxiety. He is tall, handsome, with fine dark eyes and dark brown hair. But his handsome features are marred by a deep, almost feverish tension. His poverty is absolute. He is dressed in such rags that another man, even one accustomed to squalor, would be ashamed to wear them in daylight. But Raskolnikov's pride is of a different sort. It is an intellectual pride, so immense that it has made him almost indifferent to his own wretched appearance. He is renting a tiny, miserable attic room under the very roof of the building. It is a suffocatingly small space, so low-ceilinged that a tall man feels he might knock his head at any moment. Raskolnikov calls it his coffin, and for over a month he has been entombed in it, withdrawing from all human contact, stewing in a state of nervous, agitated introspection. He is a man possessed, not by a spirit, but by an idea. It is this idea that has isolated him, that has drained the life from his face, and that now propels him out of his room and into the oppressive heat of the city. This idea, which has been growing in his mind like a monstrous obsession, is the philosophical core of our story. It is a theory born from his isolation, his poverty, and his searing intellectual arrogance. Raskolnikov has, through his readings and his brooding, concluded that all of humanity can be divided into two distinct categories, the ordinary and the extraordinary. The ordinary mass of humanity, he theorizes, are conservative, timid, and law-abiding. They are merely the material for the propagation of the species. Their sole purpose is to obey, to exist within the lines drawn for them by society and by tradition. They have no right to transgress. But then there are the extraordinary people, the geniuses, the movers of mankind, the Lycurguses, the Solons, the Napoleons. These individuals, by virtue of their superior intellect and their world-changing ideas, possess an inner right. They have the right to permit their conscience to step over certain obstacles, even if that obstacle is the life of another human being. If a man like Napoleon had needed to kill 100,000 people to achieve his aims, he would have done so without a second thought, and history would have crowned him a hero, not a murderer. For the extraordinary man, Raskolnikov believes, law is not a barrier, but a tool to be discarded when necessary. Crime for them is not crime at all, but a necessary transgression for a higher purpose. And this theory has led him to a single terrifying and all-consuming question. Which one is he? Is he an extraordinary man, a new Napoleon destined to utter a new word and change the world? Or is he, like everyone else, merely a louse, an ordinary creature trembling before the law? He has decided that there is only one way to find out. He must perform an experiment. He must prove his theory by committing a transgression himself. This is why he is now walking through the streets. He is on his way to conduct a rehearsal, a preliminary test of his nerve. His destination is the apartment of an old pawnbroker, Alyona Ivanovna, a woman he has visited before to pawn his last few meager possessions. In his mind, she is the perfect target for his experiment. She is a cruel, malicious old woman who beats her gentle half-sister, Lizaveta, and grows rich by preying on the desperation of the poor. He sees her not as a human being, but as a parasite, a social louse whose death would be a net benefit to society. Her money, he reasons, could be used to rescue hundreds from poverty, to fund his own education, and most importantly, to save his mother and sister from a life of destitution. It is, he tells himself, a simple matter of moral arithmetic. Yet as he approaches her building, his heart pounds in his chest. His grand abstract theory is colliding with a nauseating physical reality. The thought of the act itself, the blood, the violence, fills him with a profound and visceral disgust. This is the first crack in his resolve. An extraordinary man, a Napoleon, would not be feeling this sickening dread. He would be cold, calculating, and resolute. If I am now so afraid, he thinks to himself, what would it be if it somehow came to pass that I really had to do the thing itself? He climbs the dark, grimy staircase to her fourth-floor apartment. The air is thick and stale. He rings the bell, and the faint, tinny jangle seems to echo the discord in his own soul. After a moment of suspicion, the old woman unbolts the door. She is a tiny, dried-up creature of about 60, with sharp, malicious eyes that glitter with distrust. Her apartment is clean but oppressive, filled with old furniture and the faint smell of geranium oil. The rehearsal is an agony of awkwardness and self-loathing. He presents a worthless old cigarette case as a pledge, his hands trembling slightly. He feels her suspicious eyes on him, probing him, and he can barely stand it. He asks her questions about her security, about when her sister might be home, all under the guise of casual conversation, but his voice feels alien to him. Every moment in her presence reinforces his revulsion. He leaves her apartment and stumbles back down to the street, his mind in a turmoil.
Oh God, how loathsome it all is, he thinks.
And can I possibly?
No, it's nonsense, it's absurd.
How could such a horrible idea enter my head? The experiment has been a catastrophic failure. The grubby, sordid reality of the act is too much. He feels a wave of relief as he renounces the idea. It was just a game, a dark fantasy. It's over. To escape the torment of his own thoughts, he turns instinctively towards a nearby tavern. It is a dark, crowded, and foul-smelling place, the air thick with cheap tobacco and the shouts of drunken men. He orders a beer and sits in a dark corner, trying to dissolve into the chaos around him. For a man who normally avoids all society, this act is a measure of his desperation. He needs noise, he needs distraction, he needs anything to silence the voice of the theorist in his head. And it is here, in this grimy sanctuary of despair, that a strange, drunken man, with yellowed skin and swollen eyelids, will catch his eye, and in doing so will unknowingly set the wheels of Rascalnikov's terrible idea back into motion. Rascalnikov sits in the smoky tavern, his mind recoiling from the loathsome reality of his own theory, the brief and bitter taste of beer on his tongue a poor distraction from the turmoil within. He seeks the anonymity of the crowd, the oblivion of noise, but it is precisely here, in this haven of social refuse, that society finds him. It comes in the form of a man, a retired titular counselor named Semyon Zakharovich Marmaladov, who has been observing him with a strange, almost theatrical interest. He is a man of about 50, with a greenish, swollen face, puffy eyelids, and the restless, intelligent eyes of a man who understands his own degradation all too well. He approaches Rascalnikov, not with the simple familiarity of a drunkard, but with the grandiloquent and flowery language of an educated man who has fallen a great distance. He introduces himself and, without any real invitation, launches into a long, rambling, and utterly shameless public confession. It is a torrent of words, a performance of self-abasement for the entire tavern. He speaks of his own worthlessness, his drunkenness, his loss of position. But most of all, he speaks of a crucial distinction. "Poverty, sir, is no vice," he declares, his voice ringing with a strange authority. "That is a truth, but destitution, honored sir, destitution is a vice. In poverty, you may still preserve the nobility of your inborn feelings, but in destitution, no one does." Marmaladov paints a vivid, tragic portrait of his family, particularly his wife Katerina Ivanovna, a woman of noble birth, the daughter of an officer, who is now trapped in a squalid room with 3 small children. She is a woman of fierce, desperate pride. Now broken by consumption, poverty, and his own drunkenness, she scrubs the floors day and night, trying to maintain a pathetic illusion of her former respectability. All while coughing up blood, she beats the children, not out of malice, but out of a despair so profound it has curdled into rage. Marmaladov knows that his drinking is the source of her misery. Yet he cannot stop. He seeks not pleasure in the bottle, but sorrow, he says. "I drink, for in my drinking I seek fellow feeling and emotion." The confession then turns to its most devastating chapter. His daughter from a previous marriage, the quiet and timid Sofia Semyonovna, or Sonia, He recounts how Katerina Ivanovna, in a fit of cruel rage fueled by their utter lack of money, taunted Sonia for being an idle mouth to feed, goading her, shaming her, until Sonia quietly left the apartment, and when she returned late that night, she placed 30 silver rubles on the table without a word. She had sold herself, she had obtained the infamous yellow ticket, and become a prostitute to save her stepmother and half-siblings from starvation. Marmaladov speaks of this with a kind of holy terror, describing how he knelt and kissed her feet, a sinner bowing before a martyr. But his confession does not end with this act of reverence. It descends into the final circle of his own personal hell. For he admits that just that day, Sonia had given him her last 30 kopecks for a drink to ease his hangover. And he, her father, had taken the money and spent it all here in this very tavern. He points to himself, a man dressed in rags bought with his daughter's shame, and he weeps. Not with simple regret, but with a profound and almost ecstatic understanding of his own wretchedness. He speaks of the last judgment, of a day when Christ will welcome even the swine like him, saying, "Come forth, ye drunkards, come forth, ye weak ones, come forth, ye shameless ones," for he believes that God's pity is infinite, and that the greatest sinner is perhaps the one most in need of his love. Rascalnikov listens to this entire performance with a mixture of disgust, pity, and a strange, morbid fascination. This is not an abstract theory, this is the raw, unfiltered reality of human suffering. A world so broken that a gentle girl must sell her body and a father must kiss her feet before stealing her earnings for drink. The story resonates deep within him, confirming his worldview of a fundamentally unjust world when the tavern keeper finally has Marmaladov thrown out. Rascalnikov helps the man to his feet and escorts him home, a decision he cannot quite explain to himself. It is an impulse, a flicker of the very human connection he has been trying to sever. The scene at the Marmaladov's apartment is one of utter chaos and misery. The room is a cramped, squalid passageway, filled with screaming children and the furious, hacking coughs of Katerina Ivanovna. She unleashes a torrent of abuse on her drunken husband, pulling him by the hair, her voice cracking with despair and illness. Rascalnikov observes it all from the doorway, a silent witness to this portrait of destitution, and then, unseen by the family, he reaches into his pocket, takes out what little money he has left from pawning his father's watch, and places it quietly on the windowsill before turning and fleeing the apartment, feeling a sudden intense surge of regret. He wakes the next morning, feeling profoundly ashamed, not of his theories, but of his impulsive act of charity. "What a stupid thing I've done," he thinks. He sees his compassion as a weakness, a foolish sentiment that contradicts the cold, rational, and superior man he imagines himself to be. The encounter with Marmaladov has shaken him deeply. The story of Sonia's sacrifice for her family echoes the sacrifice he now perceives from his own sister Dunya. And far from extinguishing the embers of his terrible idea, Marmaladov's confession has unknowingly provided them with fresh oxygen, giving his abstract philosophy a concrete, human justification. The world is indeed a place of intolerable suffering, a place where the innocent are sacrificed, and in such a world, he thinks, perhaps an extraordinary man is not only allowed to transgress, but is morally obligated to do so. Rascalnikov awakens the next morning in his coffin-like room, the oppressive yellow of the walls seeming to press in on him, the air stale with the ghosts of yesterday's thoughts and the lingering fumes of the tavern. He feels a profound sense of fragmentation, as if the encounter with Marmaladov has split him open, exposing a raw nerve of compassion that he finds both irritating and shameful. His brief, impulsive act of charity now seems to him like a profound failure, a betrayal of the cold, rational, and superior intellect he is trying to cultivate. He is disgusted by the weakness, by the momentary lapse in his carefully constructed worldview, and he wanders his small room with a feeling of deep-seated bitterness, a bitterness directed at himself, at the wretchedness of the Marmaladov, and at the fundamental injustice of a world that requires such degradation. It is in this state of agitated misery that the landlady's servant, Nastasia, enters his room. She carries a letter, a sight so rare that it immediately cuts through his brooding. His mother has not written to him for 2 months, and his heart gives a sudden painful lurch. Letters from his mother, a loving but often anxious woman, living miles away in their provincial town, are almost always a signal of some family crisis or desperate plea. He takes the envelope, his fingers trembling almost imperceptibly. Nastasia notes his pallor and the tremor in his hands, but he dismisses her and bolts the door. He wants to be alone with this news, whatever it may be. He carries the letter to the window, to the sliver of gray light that filters into his garret, and for a moment he hesitates, clutching the sealed paper, profound and inexplicable dread washing over him. He breaks the seal and begins to read. The letter is long, written in his mother's small, cramped handwriting, covering 2 large sheets of paper, and as he reads, his expression shifts, moving from a flicker of tenderness to a deepening frown, then to a pale, cold, and almost malevolent stillness. The letter is a chronicle of pain and sacrifice, a story that will take the abstract, philosophical violence brewing in his mind and turn it into a concrete, personal, and seemingly unavoidable necessity. His mother, Pulcheria Alexandrovna Rascalnikova, begins with expressions of love and worry. She describes how she and his sister have wept and prayed for him during his long silence. She sends him what little money she can, a few rubles scraped together from her meager pension, a pittance that she knows is not enough, but is all she has. This initial burst of maternal love, which would normally warm him, now feels like a dull ache, a reminder of the love he is betraying through his self-imposed isolation. Then, the true substance of the letter begins, and Raskolnikov's face hardens. His mother recounts in painful detail the ordeal of his sister, Avdotya Romanovna, whom he calls Dunya, a young woman of immense pride, intelligence, and virtue. Dunya had been working as a governess in the household of a wealthy landowner, Arkady Ivanovich Svidrigalov. A man of depraved habits and a cruel, lecherous nature, Svidrigalov had become obsessed with Dunya, showering her with inappropriate attentions and secret proposals which she steadfastly rejected. Finally, he offered her a vast sum of money and the chance to run away with him, an offer Dunya found so insulting that she was forced to confront him, and it was at this moment that they were discovered by his wife Marfa Petrovna. As Raskolnikov reads these words, a spasm of rage contorts his features. He can see it all. His proud, intelligent sister cornered by this brutish landowner. His mind fills with images of her humiliation, of her quiet, steely defiance in the face of such predatory filth. The letter continues. Marfa Petrovna, in a fit of jealous fury, blamed Dunya entirely. She struck her, and then, in an act of breathtaking cruelty, she had Dunya driven through their local town in a common peasant's cart, open to the jeers and gossip of all their neighbors, publicly shaming her, destroying her reputation. Raskolnikov's breath catches in his throat. He crushes the letter in his fist, a low growl escaping his lips. His Dunya, his pure, noble sister, subjected to such a vile public degradation, the injustice of it burns in him like a poison. It is a personal affront, a stain on his own honor as much as hers. His mother goes on to explain how the truth was eventually revealed. Svidrigalov, in a rare moment of conscience, or perhaps simply to torment his wife further, produced a letter from Dunya that proved her complete innocence and his own guilt. Marfa Petrovna, a woman of volatile but not entirely wicked character, was horrified by her mistake. She was filled with remorse and spent the next several days going from house to house in the town, showing Dunya's letter and weeping, passionately defending the very reputation she had tried to destroy. The scandal was put to rest, and Dunya's honor was restored, but the wound remained, a deep and bitter memory of helplessness and humiliation. A perfect illustration of the power the wealthy and depraved hold over the poor and virtuous. But this story of past suffering is merely the prelude to the news that will shatter Raskolnikov's world. His mother writes that a suitor has appeared for Dunya, a distant relative of Marfa Petrovna named Pyotr Petrovich Luzhin. He is a court counselor, a man of business, 45 years old, with a secure position and a growing fortune. He seems, his mother writes with a tone of hopeful caution, to be a solid and respectable man. He has proposed to Dunya, and she has accepted. Raskolnikov reads these words, and a cold, reptilian stillness settles over him. He knows, with an instinct that bypasses all reason, that this is not a story of salvation, but of a different, more insidious kind of ruin. His intuition is confirmed as his mother explains Luzhin's philosophy of marriage. She writes, almost as an aside, that Pyotr Petrovich had confessed to her that he had always wished to marry a girl who was honest, beautiful, educated, but most importantly, poor. A girl who had experienced hardship because he explained, such a wife would see her husband as her savior, she would be slavishly grateful to him for the rest of her life. She would be submissive, and he would have absolute and unending power over her. As Rascalnikov reads this, the text seems to blur before his eyes. He sees Luzhin not as a suitor, but as a predator, a vain, petty, and controlling tyrant, who is not seeking a wife, but a beautiful, intelligent slave, a creature whose spirit he can break on the altar of his own magnanimity. And then comes the final, devastating blow. The reason for Dunya's acceptance becomes brutally clear. Luzhin intends to open a law office in St. Petersburg, and he has offered to make Rascalnikov his secretary, perhaps even his partner. The entire arrangement, the entire marriage, is a transaction. Dunya is sacrificing herself, selling herself into a lifetime of servitude to a man she cannot possibly love, for one reason and one reason only: to save him, to provide her beloved brother, Rodion, with the financial security to finish his studies and reclaim his place in the world. The letter is filled with his mother's desperate, fluttering hopes, her dreams of their family reunited, of his brilliant future, of the peace and security this marriage will bring them all. Rascalnikov finishes the letter, and his face, which had been pale, is now wet with tears. But he is not weeping from sorrow, he is weeping from a rage so profound it feels like a physical sickness. A cold smile twists his lips. It is a smile of bitter, terrible understanding. He looks at the engagement to Luzhin, and he sees Sonia Marmaladova's yellow ticket. It is the same thing, a different kind of prostitution perhaps. A more respectable one, but prostitution nonetheless, the sacrifice of a pure soul for the sake of others. His mother's naive hopes seem almost pathetic to him now. She cannot see the monster she is delivering her daughter to, but he can. He sees it with a terrifying absolute clarity. The abstract philosophical idea that had seemed so loathsome just yesterday is now resurrected. It is no longer a game or a theory. It has become a sacred duty, a moral imperative. The world has presented him with a choice. On one side is the slow, respectable ruin of his sister at the hands of Pyotr Petrovich Luzhin, and on the other is the swift, bloody, and transgressive act of killing the old pawnbroker, a human louse, and using her money to save his family from this fate. In his feverish, prideful mind, the choice is not a choice at all. It is a calling. "It shall not be," he whispers to the empty, yellow room, his voice trembling with a new and chilling conviction. "It shall not be, so long as I am alive, it shall not be. I will not accept it." He walks out of his room and into the sweltering street, no longer a hesitant dreamer, but a man with a purpose. The letter has not just given him a reason, it has given him a righteousness. The crime is no longer for himself, for his theory, or for some abstract notion of humanity. It is for Dunya, it is for his mother, it is an act of love, an act of justice, a terrible but necessary sacrifice to prevent a greater one. The theorist has found his cause, and the war within his soul is, for now, finally over. He has made his decision, and in his mind, the blood of the old woman is already on his hands. The letter has acted as a key unlocking the final chamber of Rascalnikov's resolve and unleashing the monster he had been so carefully cultivating in the abstract. He is no longer a man divided, a theorist wrestling with the morality of his own idea. He is now a son and a brother, a self-appointed avenger whose purpose has been clarified by the ink on his mother's tear-stained pages. The world, which had been a complex and agonizing knot of doubt, has suddenly become brutally, terrifyingly simple. On one side stands the slow, virtuous sacrifice of his sister, Dunya, to the odious and calculating Pyotr Petrovich Luzhin, and on the other, the swift, bloody, and transgressive removal of the human louse, Alyona Ivanovna, for Rascalnikov. This is no longer a philosophical problem but a mathematical one, a simple equation of suffering, where one vile life is subtracted to add infinite value to the lives he loves. He feels a sense of cold, righteous power, a chilling certainty that his path, however horrific, is the only one a man of his stature can possibly take. But the human soul is not a simple equation, and the parts of himself that he has tried to silence, the echoes of his childhood innocence and his innate compassion, are not so easily vanquished. They gather their strength in the deep, unlit corners of his mind, and as he collapses into an exhausted, feverish sleep, they rise up to make their final, desperate stand. He dreams, and the dream is not of Napoleon or of extraordinary men, but of a small, 7-year-old boy in his provincial hometown. It is a holiday, the air is gray and heavy, and the boy is walking with his father past a large, rowdy tavern. The path leads towards the town cemetery, a place the boy holds with a sacred awe, for it is where his grandmother and his infant brother, whom he cannot remember, are buried. He loves the little church and the ancient gravestones. He feels a sense of peace and reverence there, a connection to a past he holds dear. As they pass the tavern, a great lumbering cart, the kind used for hauling heavy goods, is being harnessed by a group of loud, drunken peasants. Their faces are red, their voices coarse. They are a terrifying and alien presence to the small boy. He watches as they try to get a small, scrawny, old peasant mare to pull the impossibly heavy load. The horse is a pathetic creature, her sides heaving, her legs trembling, a living portrait of meek suffering. The peasants, full of drunken bravado, begin to whip her, urging her to pull, but she cannot. She simply does not have the strength. The child watches, his heart filled with a terrible, helpless pity. He feels every lash of the whip as if it were on his own skin. The drunken laughter of the peasants grates on his ears, a sound of pure, senseless cruelty. The scene escalates into a nightmare. The owner of the mare, a thick-necked peasant named Mikolka, becomes enraged by the horse's weakness. He screams that she is a drain on his resources, that he might as well kill her, flog her to death. The crowd roar, their faces twisted with a kind of gleeful savagery. They climb into the cart, adding their weight, and Mikolka, now in a frenzy, grabs not a whip but a heavy iron crowbar. The boy wants to scream, to run, but he is paralyzed by horror. He watches as Mikolka, with a grunt of exertion, brings the crowbar down with full force on the horse's back. She groans and sags, but does not fall. He strikes again and again, the dull, sickening thud of iron on bone echoing in the gray air. The mare stumbles, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her gentle eyes wide with a quiet, uncomprehending terror. Mikolka, lost in his bloodlust, begins to strike her head, aiming for her muzzle, for her eyes. The boy can bear it no longer. He screams and pushes his way through the crowd. He runs to the dying horse. He doesn't know what he's doing. He just feels an overwhelming need to protect her, to comfort her. He throws his arms around her bloody head and kisses her lips, her eyes, the brutalized muzzle from which blood is now streaming. His father grabs him and tries to pull him away, but the boy struggles, a terrible wail tearing from his throat, and then, with one final savage blow, Mikolka smashes the horse's skull, and she collapses in a heap, finally dead. The dream ends with the image of the small, weeping boy, his heart broken by a world that could contain such casual, pointless, and horrific brutality. Rascalnikov awakens with a gasp, his body drenched in a cold sweat, his heart pounding against his ribs as if trying to escape his chest. He is trembling, the phantom feeling of the mare's blood still on his lips. "My God," he cries out into the silent, yellow room. The dream has shaken him to his very core. It has bypassed his intellect, his theories, his justifications, and struck directly at his soul, revealing a truth he had tried to bury, that he is not a cold, detached Napoleon, but that small, weeping boy, that he is a creature capable of profound pity, a man who is sickened and horrified by violence. "Can it be?" he whispers, his voice choked with self-disgust. "Can it be that I will really take an axe, that I will strike her on the head, split her skull open, that my feet will slip in the warm, sticky blood, that I will break the lock, steal and tremble and hide, all covered in blood, with the axe? Good God, can it?" He feels a wave of immense, liberating relief wash over him. The dream, he believes, has been a form of divine intervention, a final horrifying glimpse into the abyss that has purged him of his monstrous obsession. He prays for deliverance, for freedom from this dark enchantment. He feels as though a great weight has been lifted from his heart. The theory is dead, the plan is abandoned. He is free, and in this newfound freedom, he feels an overwhelming desire for fresh air, for human life. He leaves his room and walks, not with the furtive, anxious steps of a conspirator, but with the aimless drift of a man reborn. He ends up, by pure chance, in the Haymarket, a chaotic, vibrant hub of commerce and life, a place teeming with the very ordinary humanity he had so recently held in contempt. But if the dream was an act of God, what follows seems to be an act of the devil, or perhaps of a crueler, more indifferent force called fate. As he stands in the crowded market, his mind still basking in its newfound freedom, he overhears a conversation. It is Lizaveta Ivanovna, the pawnbroker's gentle, timid half-sister, talking with a tradesman and his wife. Rascalnikov's attention is snagged by the mention of her name, and he draws closer, listening with a sudden, inexplicable intensity. Lizaveta is making an arrangement with the tradesman to come see him the following evening. "So tomorrow, at 7 o'clock, she says, her voice clear and distinct. "You must come," the tradesman replies, "at 7 o'clock tomorrow, and Alyona Ivanovna will be at home by herself. Is that right?" "Yes," Lizaveta confirms, "she will be home and alone." The words strike Rascalnikov like a physical blow, like a bolt of lightning from a clear sky. This single, overheard sentence changes everything. It is a piece of information so perfect, so precise, so impossibly convenient, that it feels less like a coincidence and more like a preordained decree. All of his doubts, his fears, his moral revulsion, all the freedom he had felt just moments before, are swept away in an instant. The need to plan, to scheme, to wrestle with logistics, is gone. The universe itself has handed him the opportunity on a silver platter. It has pronounced his sentence. He feels a sudden chilling numbness, a haze of complete and utter fatalism. It is as if his own will has ceased to exist, and he is now merely a puppet, being dragged along by an invisible, inexorable thread towards his destiny. He walks away from the Haymarket in a daze, no longer a man but an instrument. The final day passes mechanically. He sleeps, but it is the heavy, dreamless sleep of the condemned. He moves with the detached precision of an automaton. He meticulously prepares a fake pledge, a small, smooth piece of wood wrapped in paper and tied with a ribbon, designed to distract the old woman's attention for the crucial few seconds he will need. He sews a loop, a noose he calls it, on the inside of his overcoat, a place to conceal the axe, so that it will not be visible as he walks. And then, at the appointed hour, he goes to the porter's lodge, and there, lying in a corner, is the axe, left behind by the porter by chance. Another sign, another confirmation from fate. He slips it into the loop and walks out into the street, his heart a cold, dead weight in his chest. The walk to the pawnbroker's building is a blur. He climbs the 4 flights of stairs, his legs moving as if they belong to someone else. He rings the bell, his ears deaf to its tinny jangle. The door opens, and he is inside. The moment unfolds with the terrible, surreal slowness of a nightmare. He hands her the pledge. She turns her back to the light to untie the ribbon, and in that instant, he pulls the axe from his coat. He feels no rage, no pity, no intellectual justification, only a blank, terrifying void. He brings the blunt side of the axe down on her skull, and then, losing control, he strikes again, and again. The theorist is gone, replaced by a clumsy, brutal butcher, and as he stands over the body, his hands trembling, the door to the apartment opens, and Lizaveta, the gentle soul, whose overheard words had sealed his fate, walks in. She sees the carnage and freezes, a silent, paralyzed witness to the horror, and Rascalnikov, his mind now operating on pure animalistic instinct, raises the bloody axe one last time. The dream of the beaten mare has become a waking, breathing, and unspeakably bloody reality. The theorist is gone, and in his place stands a creature of pure, frayed nerve. He is alone in the apartment. A silent, crimson stage, where his grand idea has just had its horrific premiere, but there is no triumph, no feeling of extraordinary power, only a vast, echoing emptiness, and the chilling, metallic scent in the air. His mind, which moments ago was a whirlwind of philosophical justification, is now a blank slate of animalistic panic. He did not commit a transgression. He has simply made a terrible, irreversible mess, and the only thought that remains is the primal urge to escape, to erase what has been done, to become invisible. He moves with a clumsy, frantic energy that betrays the complete failure of his cold, calculated plan. He searches for the old woman's valuables, but his hands, stained and trembling, refuse to obey him. He fumbles with the keys, their jangling a deafening noise in the silent apartment. He cannot find the main stash of riches he had dreamed of, the money that was supposed to launch his great career and save his sister. Instead, he finds only a small purse and a handful of cheap, gaudy trinkets, worthless baubles that feel like a mockery of his grand ambition. He stuffs them into his pockets, not with the satisfaction of a conqueror, but with the frantic haste of a common thief. The great Napoleon has been reduced to a pathetic, trembling scavenger. And then, a sound from the world outside that stops his heart cold. Footsteps on the stairs, growing louder, closer, then a sharp, impatient jangling of the doorbell. Someone is outside. He is trapped. The four walls of the apartment, which moments ago were his stage, have now become his cage. He freezes, his breath catching in his throat. A wave of pure, paralyzing terror washing over him. He can hear voices through the door. Two men, Koch and Pestriakov. They are clients of the old woman. And they are growing suspicious. They shake the door. They call her name. They note that the door is latched from the inside, a detail that sends a fresh wave of ice through Rascalnikov's veins. He stands motionless, barely breathing. A mouse hiding from circling hawks. He hears them discuss going to fetch the porter, to force the door. This is his only chance, a sliver of an opportunity in a moment of pure despair. After they leave, he slips the chain off the hook, opens the door, and steps out onto the landing. But as he begins to descend, he hears them again, returning with the porter. There is nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, except for one miraculous stroke of luck. The second-floor apartment, which had been undergoing renovations, is empty and its door is wide open, a silent, dark invitation. He slips inside and presses himself against the wall, listening as the three men ascend the stairs past him, their heavy footsteps a drumbeat, counting down the seconds of his potential freedom. He waits until their voices have faded into the apartment above, then he slips out and walks down the stairs, not running, but walking with a strange, deliberate calmness. The calmness of a man who has passed through the eye of a hurricane and come out the other side into an eerie, unnatural stillness. He walks out into the street, into the bustling, indifferent crowd that swallows him up instantly. He is free. He has escaped. It feels like a miracle, a sign of fate's continued favor. But as he makes his way back to his own building, the stolen trinkets in his pocket feel like stones, dragging him down, the evidence of his deed, a physical weight he must now carry. He reaches his room, his coffin, and collapses. The immense strain of the past hour finally breaking him. He is not relieved. He is shattered. He inspects his clothes for any stains, any trace of what happened, and finds none. Another miracle. But the real evidence, the real stain, is not on his trousers, but on his soul, and it cannot be washed away. He is overcome by a new kind of dread. The practical, logistical horror of what to do with the stolen goods. They are the tangible proof of his transgression, and they seem to radiate a malevolent energy. He hides them in a hole in the wall behind the cheap wallpaper. But he knows it is not enough. He feels as if the entire world can see them, can see through the plaster and the paper directly into his guilty heart. The night that follows is a descent into oblivion, a black chasm of fragmented sleep and waking terrors, and when he awakens late the next morning, it is clear that something inside him has broken. A sickness has taken hold, a deep consuming fever that is not of the body but of the mind. His thoughts are disconnected, his limbs feel heavy, his room spins. The physical world beginning to warp and melt under the intense heat of his own internal torment. The punishment has begun. Not from the law, not from society, but from within. His own body and mind have become his judge, jury, and torturer. It is in this state of near delirium that Nastia, the servant, enters and hands him a folded blue piece of paper, a police summons. The sight of the official document is like a death sentence. He is found out. It is over. The timing is so impossibly, cruelly perfect that it feels like the final mocking joke of a malevolent fate. He takes the paper, his mind a blank slate of terror, and walks to the police station like a man walking to his own execution. The world outside is a dizzying, unreal spectacle. He is detached, observing everything as if through a pane of warped glass. He even feels a strange, perverse desire to confess, to fall on his knees in the middle of the street and get it over with, to end the unbearable tension, the sordid reality of the police station with its grimy walls, ink-stained officials, and the smell of human misery only adds to his sense of dislocation. He is brought before the assistant superintendent, a fiery, explosive man nicknamed the powder keg for his explosive temper. Rascalnikov braces himself, ready for the accusation, ready for the end, But the end does not come. The summons, he discovers, is not about the double event that has consumed his entire being. It is about a simple IOU he had given to his landlady for unpaid rent. A mundane, pathetic debt. The dramatic irony is so vast, so absurd, that he almost laughs. He has been wrestling with the fate of his soul, with Napoleonic theories and the transgression of moral law, and he has been called here to account for a few miserable rubles. The banality of it all is more terrifying than any accusation. But the ordeal is not over. As he stands in the office, trying to compose himself, he hears the officers discussing the very events of the previous evening. They speak of the old pawnbroker, of her sister, of the baffling crime. Every word is a hammer blow to his frayed nerves. They talk about the search for the culprit, the clues, the theories, and the psychological pressure, combined with his raging fever and lack of sleep, becomes too much to bear. The room begins to spin, the voices fade into a dull roar, and Rascalnikov, the extraordinary man, the cold-blooded theorist, crumples to the floor in a dead faint. It is his first great mistake, an act of weakness that plants the first tiny seed of suspicion in the minds of the authorities. He has survived his first encounter with the law, but he has left a small indelible crack in the facade of his innocence, a crack that will only grow wider as his unraveling continues. Rascalnikov comes to his senses on a hard wooden chair in the police station, the sharp smell of ammonia stinging his nostrils, and the gruff, suspicious face of an officer leaning over him. He has drawn the one thing a man in his position cannot afford: attention. His fainting spell, a simple act of physical weakness, has marked him out from the drab, anonymous flow of humanity that passes through this office. He is no longer just a debtor. He is now an object of curiosity. A strange, overly sensitive young man who collapses at the mere mention of a local crime. He stumbles out of the station, his mind a complete blank. The conscious, thinking part of him has shut down, leaving only a core of pure animal instinct that screams a single silent command: hide the evidence. He walks, or rather drifts, through the streets of St. Petersburg in a feverish haze. The stolen goods in his pocket feel like they are burning through the fabric of his coat. A physical manifestation of his searing guilt, his mind, usually a torrent of complex theories and arguments, can now only produce one frantic, repeating thought: get rid of them. He is drawn to the canal, the dark, murky water, offering a promise of oblivion, a place to cast away the tangible proof of his deed. But as he stands on the bank, he is paralyzed by a new and potent strain of paranoia. He feels 1,000 eyes upon him. Every passing barge, every distant window, every casual stroller seems to be watching him, judging him, waiting for him to make his move. He cannot do it. He cannot risk being seen. Calculating Napoleon, who could step over another's life for a principle, is now a terrified creature, unable to perform the simple act of dropping a purse into the water. He wanders aimlessly, his feet carrying him through unfamiliar back streets and into a large, desolate courtyard, a forgotten corner of the city used as a dumping ground, and it is here that fate, or chance, offers him a solution. He sees a massive, unpainted stone, weighing perhaps half a ton, propped against a wooden fence. A small hollow has been carved out by time and weather beneath it. With a surge of desperate, feverish strength, he finds a smaller stone and begins to frantically dig and pry, creating a deeper cavity. He works with the single-minded focus of a burrowing animal, his hands raw, his body shaking, and into this small, dark grave he deposits the purse and the trinkets, the pathetic, tawdry spoils of his grand transgression. He heaves the great stone back into place, and as it settles with a dull thud, he feels an immense, almost ecstatic sense of relief. It is as if in burying the objects, he has buried the crime itself. He feels he has cut himself off from all of humanity, severing the last thread that connects him to his past self and to the events of that terrible evening. But the mind cannot be so easily cleansed. He returns to his room, his coffin, and the sickness that has been brewing within him finally erupts. He succumbs to a violent brain fever, a complete collapse of his physical and mental faculties. For the next 4 days, he ceases to exist as a conscious being. He is lost in a sea of delirium, a chaotic nightmare of fragmented images and disjointed sounds. He sees the face of the police officer, Ilya Petrovich. He feels the blows of the landlady beating him. He hears the weeping of his mother and the desperate confession of Marmaladov. It is a period of pure, undiluted punishment, his own mind turning on itself, replaying his sins in a terrifying endless loop. He is utterly alone, helpless, and on the brink of death, until a familiar booming voice cuts through the feverish darkness. The voice belongs to his one and only friend Dmitri Prokofyevich Razumikin. Razumikin is, in every conceivable way, Rascalnikov's opposite, where Rascalnikov is isolated, proud, and theoretical. Razumikin is sociable, humble, and practical. He is a man of immense physical and emotional strength, poor, like Rascalnikov, but facing his poverty with a kind of cheerful, boisterous determination rather than bitter resentment. He finds his friend in a state of near death, and his response is immediate, simple, and profoundly human. He doesn't theorize, he acts. He finds the doctor, he confronts the landlady, he uses his own last few rubles to buy Rascalnikov clean clothes from a second-hand dealer and a plate of soup. He is the embodiment of simple, uncomplicated goodness, a force of human connection breaking through the walls of Rascalnikov's self-imposed prison. Under the care of Razumikin and a young, competent doctor named Zosimov, Rascalnikov slowly begins to emerge from his delirium. He lies in his bed, weak and disoriented, listening to the conversations that flow around him as if from a great distance. Razumikin, in his loud, good-natured way, has taken over. He has settled his friend's debt with the landlady, charmed Nastasya into providing regular meals, and now fills the small room with his energetic presence. He and Zosimov discuss the news of the town, and inevitably they speak of the crime. Rascalnikov listens, his heart pounding as they talk about the case, about the pawnbroker, and about the main suspect, a simple painter named Miko Ka, the very name from his dream of the beaten mare who was found in possession of some of the old woman's earrings and has given a confused, fumbling confession. Rascalnikov lies still, his eyes closed, feigning sleep, but his mind is racing. Every word is a potential threat, every casual remark a possible accusation. He learns that the police are baffled, that they believe the culprit must have been an experienced and cunning man who escaped through sheer, miraculous luck. He hears Razumikin passionately arguing that the painter is innocent, that the real perpetrator is a man of intellect and cunning, words that send a fresh chill of fear down his spine. He is trapped in his bed, a passive observer to a conversation about himself, a conversation that dissects his own actions with a terrifying objective clarity. Razumikin, in his loyalty, is unknowingly both his greatest protector and his most dangerous accuser. It is into this tense atmosphere of sickness and suspicion that a new and unwelcome figure arrives. It is Pyotr Petrovich Luzhin, his sister Dunya's fiancé. He enters the squalid little room like a man entering a contaminated area, dressed immaculately in fashionable new clothes, a lavender-gloved hand holding a pristine top hat. He is the physical embodiment of smug, self-satisfied propriety, and his presence in the filthy garret is a jarring and offensive absurdity. He introduces himself with an air of condescending importance, explaining that he has come to meet his future brother-in-law and discuss important family matters. His every word, his every gesture, radiates a sense of profound vanity and a deep-seated belief in his own superiority. Rascalnikov, who has been lying silently on his miserable sofa, weak and pale, feels a surge of pure, unadulterated hatred. This is the man for whom Dunya is sacrificing herself. This pompous, preening creature with his talk of progressive ideas and rational egoism. Luzhin begins to lecture the room on his philosophy, a cheap, self-serving creed that advocates for loving oneself above all others. A philosophy that he believes will lead to a better, more prosperous society. As he speaks, Rascalnikov slowly, deliberately, pushes himself up to a sitting position. His eyes, burning with fever and malice, are fixed on Luzhin. The room falls silent, sensing a confrontation, and then, with a quiet, raspy voice that trembles with suppressed fury, Rascalnikov speaks. He does not argue, he does not debate, he simply and utterly annihilates him. He calls Luzhin a slanderer for misrepresenting his mother's words in a letter. He attacks his character, his ideas, and his intentions towards Dunya, and then, with a final chilling command, he tells Luzhin to go to hell and orders him out of his room. The outburst is shocking in its ferocity. A sudden, violent eruption from the seemingly prostrate man on the sofa. Luzhin is left speechless, his face a mask of disbelief and wounded pride. He sputters, he threatens, he tries to regain his composure. But the damage is done. He has been profoundly and publicly humiliated. Razumikin, though initially shocked, instinctively sides with his friend, physically blocking Luzhin's path and escorting him out of the room with a barely concealed glee. Luzhin storms out, vowing that he will never set foot in the room again, his pride shattered, and his mind already plotting revenge. Rascalnikov collapses back onto his pillow, exhausted but triumphant. He has, in his first conscious act since his illness, defended his sister's honor and severed ties with the man he despises. He has re-engaged with the world, not as a theorist, but as a protective brother. Yet the victory is a hollow one. He has made a powerful and vindictive enemy, and he is still a prisoner of his own feverish mind. His secrets still locked away in his heart like a cancerous growth. He has found an ally in the fiercely loyal Razumikin, but in his delirium he cannot yet tell if his friend is a shield to hide behind, or simply another witness to his slow and inevitable unraveling. The abrupt departure of Pyotr Petrovich Luzhin leaves a strange vacuum in the small, squalid room. The air, which moments before had been thick with his cologne and self-importance, now seems to settle, leaving behind only the lingering scent of sickness and poverty. Rascalnikov lies back, his body trembling with a post-confrontational exhaustion, yet his mind is strangely, wonderfully clear. It is as if the act of expelling Luzhin, of defending his sister with such raw, unthinking fury, has lanced a boil, releasing some of the toxic pressure that has been building within him. The fever seems to have broken, and for the first time in days he feels a flicker of his old strength. A desire not to hide in his coffin, but to move, to walk, to breathe the city air, no matter how foul it may be. His friend Razumikin is overjoyed by this sudden recovery. He chatters on, half drunk from the party he had abandoned, celebrating Rascalnikov's spirited takedown of the pompous peacock, Luzhin. But his joy turns to baffled concern as Rascalnikov, still pale and unsteady, begins to dress. Insisting that he must go out, Razumikin protests. He pleads. He argues that it is madness for a man still weak with fever to wander the streets, but he cannot dissuade him. Rascalnikov is possessed by an inexplicable, irresistible urge, a compulsion to re-engage with the world he has just violently transgressed against. Seeing that his friend is resolute, the loyal Razumikin declares that he will not leave his side, and so the two young men step out into the evening, one a boisterous, simple-hearted guardian, the other a silent, haunted man taking his first tentative steps back into the land of the living. They drift through the crowded streets, and end up at Razumikin's suggestion in the Crystal Palace, a tavern and restaurant that, while not opulent, represents a world of cheap, gaudy normalcy that feels utterly alien to Rascalnikov. He sits silently, observing the room, his mind a quiet, watchful void, and then he sees him. Sitting at a nearby table is Alexander Grigorievich Zamyotov, the head clerk from the police station, the very man who had been present during his fainting spell. A sane man, a cautious man, would have shrunk from this encounter, would have left immediately. But Rascalnikov does the opposite. He feels a strange, perverse, and exhilarating pull towards the danger. He leaves Razumikin, and, with a cool, mocking smile on his lips, he sits down opposite the police clerk. What follows is one of the most bizarre and psychologically revealing conversations in the entire novel. It is a game, a dangerous, high-stakes performance in which Rascalnikov, with a mixture of childlike recklessness and breathtaking arrogance, begins to play with his own secret. He taunts Zamyotov, treating him not as an officer of the law but as a confidant. He speaks of the crime, the double event that has the whole city talking, and he begins to theorize, to speculate on how the culprit must have felt, how he must have acted. He describes with a chill intimate accuracy the terror and the fever that must have gripped the man, painting a perfect portrait of his own psychological state. Zamyotov listens, intrigued and slightly unnerved by this strange, intense young man. Then, Rascalnikov pushes the game further, into the realm of the truly terrifying. He leans in and begins to describe, hypothetically, how he would have handled the stolen goods. He wouldn't have thrown them in the canal, he says with a knowing smirk, because that's too obvious, too clumsy. Instead, he would have found a large stone in some remote, forgotten courtyard and hidden them there, where they would lie undisturbed. He is describing, with perfect precision, the very thing he did just hours before. It is a confession disguised as a flight of fancy, a desperate compulsive need to speak the truth while wearing the mask of a liar. Zamyotov is visibly startled. The detail is too specific, too strange. He begins to suspect that this is more than just the rambling of a sick man. Finally, Rascalnikov lays his last, most dangerous card on the table. He looks Zamyotov directly in the eye, his own eyes burning with a feverish, mocking light, and asks, "And what if it was I who did away with the old woman and Lizaveta?" The question hangs in the air between them, a monstrous, unbelievable proposition. Zamyotov is stunned into silence. He stares at Rascalnikov, searching his face for some sign of a joke, of madness. He sees only a pale, thin smile. He cannot believe it. The idea is too absurd. Rascalnikov is a poor, sickly student, not a cunning and ruthless perpetrator. He concludes that the young man is simply delirious from his illness, that this is all a strange, fever-induced prank. He dismisses the question with a nervous laugh, and in that moment Rascalnikov has won his game. He has dangled the truth in the face of the law, and the law has blinked. He feels a surge of triumphant, contemptuous power. He leaves the Crystal Palace abruptly, leaving a bewildered Zamyotov and a furious Razumikhin behind. He wanders out into the darkness, his mind buzzing with the thrill of his own audacity. He walks until he finds himself on a bridge, looking down into the black, churning water of the canal below, and as he stares into the depths, a dark thought, a fleeting temptation, crosses his mind. But before it can take root, a commotion erupts nearby. A woman, her face a mask of despair, has climbed onto the railing and thrown herself into the water. There is a splash. A chorus of shouts, the arrival of a policeman. A frantic rescue effort. Rascalnikov watches the entire drama unfold with a cold, profound, and terrifying apathy. He feels nothing, not a flicker of pity, not a shred of human connection. "It's not my business," he thinks to himself, and turns away, his heart a cold, dead stone in his chest. His aimless wandering leads him, as if drawn by an invisible magnet, back to the one place on earth he should be avoiding. The tenement building where Alyona Ivanovna lived and ceased to live. He feels an irresistible, self-destructive urge to revisit the scene, to look upon his own handiwork. He walks up the stairs, noting that the fourth-floor apartment is now open, with workmen inside, redecorating. He enters and begins to act with a strange, almost theatrical madness. He quizzes the workmen about the crime. He runs his hand over the newly scrubbed floorboards, asking if the crimson stains are gone. He rings the bell, enjoying its tinny, familiar jangle. His behavior is so bizarre, so overtly suspicious, that a crowd gathers. The workman and the porter mock him, convinced he is either drunk or insane. He has, for the second time, drawn a circle of dangerous attention around himself. Just as the crowd is about to turn on him, their mockery curdling into aggression. A new commotion erupts in the street below. A horse-drawn carriage has run someone over. The crowd, always hungry for a new spectacle, abandons Rascalnikov and surges towards the accident. Rascalnikov, too, is drawn towards the chaos, and as he pushes his way to the front, he sees a familiar figure lying crushed and broken on the cobblestones. It is Marmaladov, the drunken clerk from the tavern. His face is pale, his clothes are soaked with the evidence of his injuries, and he is clearly close to his end, and in that instant, the cold, apathetic shell that had encased Rascalnikov's heart shatters completely. The theorist who felt nothing for the desperate woman on the bridge is gone, replaced by a man of swift, decisive, and compassionate action. He takes charge of the scene. His voice clear and commanding, he tells the crowd to carry the dying man home. He dispatches someone to fetch a doctor. He shouts for a priest. All of his intellectual detachment, all of his nihilistic apathy has been burned away by the raw, undeniable, and tragic reality of this broken man. He follows the small procession back to the Marmaladovs' squalid room, the very place where his journey into the heart of human suffering had begun. He has been dragged, against his will, out of the sterile laboratory of his own mind and back into the messy, painful, and deeply interconnected world of other people, a world he can no longer deny is his own. The scene in the Marmaladovs' room is a tableau of chaos and despair. Rascalnikov, a moment ago a cold observer of life, is now at the very center of its most painful ritual, the act of dying. He cradles the broken body of Marmaladov, trying to offer what little comfort he can. The room is crammed with curious neighbors, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid fascination, while Katerina Ivanovna, her face flushed with the fever of consumption and her mind teetering on the edge of madness, flits about the room, giving frantic, contradictory orders. Her grief is not a quiet sorrow, but a loud, theatrical, and deeply public performance of her own long-suffering martyrdom. And through it all, her 3 small children huddle in a corner, their faces pale with a terror they are too young to comprehend. It is into this maelstrom of suffering that a new figure appears. A young woman, dressed in the gaudy, inappropriate finery of her trade, her face painted, her clothes cheap but bright, a garish splash of color in the drab gray room. It is Sonia. She has been summoned from the street, and she stands in the doorway, her eyes wide with a quiet, terrified shame. She shrinks from the gazes of the crowd, a fallen creature in a room of judgmental strangers, but it is for her that the dying Marmaladov has been waiting. As she approaches, his eyes, clouded with pain, fix upon her, a flicker of recognition, of profound, agonizing remorse, illuminating his features. The priest arrives and performs the last rites, and in his final moments, Marmaladov pulls his daughter's hand towards him, trying to speak, to beg for the forgiveness he knows he does not deserve. Sonia, her own face a mask of silent, unbearable grief, understands. She leans close to him, whispering words of comfort, and as he breathes his last, his final gaze is fixed upon the face of the daughter he had so terribly wronged, the daughter whose sacrifice had funded his own degradation. After he is gone, Rascalnikov, who has been a silent pillar of strength throughout the ordeal, turns to the now widowed Katerina Ivanovna. He feels a strange, powerful surge of life. A feeling that his own existence had not ended with the old woman. He presses into her hand all the money he has, the 25 rubles his mother had sent him, and tells her it is for the funeral, an act of charity so profound and impulsive it surprises even himself. Before he leaves, he turns to the eldest child, Polexia, and asks her to pray for him, for the servant of God, Rodion. This sudden, desperate plea for prayer is a crack in his atheistic intellectual armor, an admission of a spiritual burden he cannot carry alone. He walks away from the scene of death, feeling strangely revitalized. The act of helping, of connecting, of giving, has temporarily washed away the filth of his own transgression. He feels a powerful sense of renewed energy, a belief that he can still live, that he can still overcome what he has done. He walks with a firm step, his mind clear, but as he climbs the stairs to his own room, he is met with a sight that shatters his newfound peace. Standing there, waiting for him, is his friend Razumikin. And behind him, in the dim light of the landing, are 2 women, his mother, Pulcheria Alexandrovna, and his sister, Dunya. They have arrived, they are here, and in that instant, Rascalnikov's brief flirtation with life is over, and the suffocating reality of his isolation comes crashing back down upon him. The reunion is a catastrophe of emotion, a collision of desperate love and horrified shock. His mother and sister, who have dreamed of this moment for months, rush towards him with cries of joy, but their joy evaporates the instant they see him. They see not the brilliant, handsome son and brother. They remember but a pale, ragged, wild-eyed creature, standing in the doorway of a squalid tomb. They take in his wretched clothes, his feverish gaze, the utter desolation of his coffin-like room, and their faces fall, their hope replaced by a raw, unconcealed terror. Rascalnikov, for his part, stands frozen. He feels no joy, no love, only a profound and agonizing sense of alienation. Their presence is an intrusion, their love a terrible, unbearable burden. They are a living reminder of the very humanity he has just betrayed. He stands in silence for a long, torturous moment, his face a cold, unreadable mask. Then, without a word, his eyes roll back in his head, and he collapses onto the floor in a dead faint, utterly overwhelmed by the psychological shock of their arrival. It is Razumikin, the ever-practical, ever-loyal friend, who springs into action. He carries Rascalnikov to his miserable sofa. He reassures the 2 terrified women, explaining that his friend is in the grip of a serious illness, that this is not the real Rodion, he is a whirlwind of chaotic but well-intentioned energy, and he quickly takes on the role of protector and mediator. He recognizes that the two women cannot stay, that their presence is only agitating his friend further, and he gently, persuasively escorts them out of the building and back to their own shabby lodging. That night, Razumikin becomes the bridge between the two fractured parts of the family. He sits with Porfiry and Dunya, and though he is half drunk, he speaks with a raw, passionate eloquence. He tells them everything he knows, defending Rascalnikov with a fierce, unwavering loyalty. He explains that their Rodya is not a monster, but a brilliant, proud, and melancholic man, who has been driven to the brink by his poverty and his isolation. He is, Razumikin insists, generous to a fault, as proven by the story he'd heard of him helping a poor, dying clerk just that evening. Razumikin is completely captivated by Dunya, by her beauty, her intelligence, and her quiet, dignified strength, and in his long, rambling, drunken monologue, he is not just defending his friend, he is trying to prove his own worth to her, to show her that he too is a man of substance and feeling. The next morning, the fragile family unit, now propped up by the tireless Razumikin, attempts to approach Rascalnikov again, but this time with a more cautious, strategic plan. They first visit the doctor, Sozomov, who provides a sober, clinical assessment. Rascalnikov's condition, he says, is not merely physical, it is a psychological malady, a form of monomania, an obsession with a single, powerful idea, exacerbated by his poverty and his poor nutrition. The diagnosis confirms his mother's worst fears, but also provides a framework for understanding his strange, cruel behavior. They gather back in Rascalnikov's room, a tense, anxious group, the air thick with unspoken fears and desperate hopes. Rascalnikov is awake and lucid. The fever has receded, leaving him weak but clear-headed. He is still cold, still distant, but he is no longer actively hostile. A fragile truce seems to settle over the room. But it is shattered by the one topic that cannot be avoided. The looming shadow of Pyotr Petrovich, Lucian. Dunya reveals that she has received a letter from her fiancé, a letter that is both a demand and an ultimatum. Lucian writes that he was deeply insulted by his reception the previous day, and he forbids Dunya from meeting with her brother in his presence ever again. He has arranged a meeting for that very evening, and he states clearly that if Rascalnikov is there, he, Lucian, will immediately leave, forcing her to choose between them. The moment of decision has arrived. All eyes turn to Rascalnikov, who has listened to the contents of the letter with a cold, contemptuous smile. He does not waver, he does not negotiate, he simply reiterates his own ultimatum. It is him or Lucian. He will not tolerate the man's presence. He will not allow his sister to enter into such a degrading and transparently self-serving union. He places the full weight of the decision onto Dunya's shoulders, forcing her to make a choice that will determine the future of their entire family. And Dunya, who has listened to it all with a quiet, powerful composure, does not hesitate. She looks at her brother, at the wreckage of the brilliant young man she adores, and her resolve hardens. She declares that she must see this through, that the meeting with Lucian will happen, and that Rodya must be there. It is not a negotiation, it is a final decisive test of Lucian's character, a test she already knows he is going to fail. Dunya's quiet declaration hangs in the air of the squalid little room, a statement of intent so powerful it silences all argument. She has chosen her brother, and in doing so, has thrown down the gauntlet to her fiancé Pyotr Petrovich Lucian. A fragile and deeply uncomfortable truce settles over the reunited family. Rascalnikov has won this initial victory, but he is a sullen and ungracious victor. He retreats back into a cold, resentful silence, exhausted by the emotional effort. His mother and sister watch him with a mixture of love, pity, and profound, unspoken terror. They have found their Rodya, but he is a stranger to them, a man haunted by a darkness they cannot begin to comprehend. The happy reunion they had dreamed of for months has become a tense, painful vigil at the bedside of a man who seems to be suffering from a sickness far deeper than any physical ailment. It is into this paralytic tension that the ever-practical and energetic Razumikin once again injects a dose of forward motion. He is the only one capable of action, of planning, of managing the chaotic emotional currents in the room. He insists that Rascalnikov is in no condition to go anywhere, and that Porfiry and Dunya must also get some rest before their momentous evening meeting. He devises a plan. With his typical boisterous enthusiasm, he will escort the two ladies back to their lodgings. He will look in on his own affairs, and then he will return to Rascalnikov's side, acting as both nurse and jailer to ensure his friend does not wander off again. Before finally accompanying the women to their confrontation with Luzhin, he assumes the role of protector and chief of staff, with a natural, unthinking grace, his simple, good-hearted loyalty. A stark contrast to Raskolnikov's proud and corrosive isolation. As he walks with Porfiry and Dunya through the bustling St. Petersburg streets, Razumikin, now completely and utterly captivated by Dunya's beauty and strength, begins to talk, and once he starts, he cannot seem to stop. He is awkward, he blushes, he is painfully aware of his own shabby clothes and his rambling speech, but he is driven by a desperate need to prove his worth, to show these two dignified women that he is more than just a drunken, boisterous student. He speaks passionately about Raskolnikov, defending his friend's character, explaining his theories on his recent strange behavior, and then in a burst of creative energy, he unveils a grand new plan, a business venture he wants to start with his friend. He tells them he wants to set up a publishing house, a small press dedicated to translating important foreign works of science and literature into Russian. It is a brilliant, practical idea, a way to use their intellectual talents to build a respectable and self-sufficient life. He speaks of specific books they could translate, of articles they could publish, of the small but steady profit they could make. This is not just idle chatter. It is Razumikin's gambit, his desperate, heartfelt attempt to offer his friend a lifeline, a path out of the darkness. He is trying to build a future for Raskolnikov, a future of purpose, of intellectual labor, and of dignity, a future that might just pull him back from the precipice of his own obsessive ideas. Dunya listens to him, a faint, curious smile on her lips. She sees through his awkward, rambling exterior to the genuine, fiercely loyal heart beneath. She sees a good man, a true friend, and perhaps for the first time, a potential ally in the fight to save her brother. But while Razumikin is busy building bridges to the future, Raskolnikov is trying to burn the last of his own, left alone in his room. He is overcome by a familiar wave of irritable restlessness. The feeling of being managed, of being cared for and worried over, is an intolerable affront to his pride. He cannot stand their pity, their anxious glances, their suffocating love. He feels a desperate, almost violent need to assert his own will, to break free from their well-intentioned prison. He gets up, dresses, and with a cold, defiant look on his face, he slips out of his room. He is going nowhere in particular. He simply needs to prove that he can, that he is not a passive invalid to be managed, but a man of his own agency, even if that agency leads him only to destruction. His rebellion is short-lived. He gets no further than the landing before the brief surge of feverish energy deserts him, leaving him dizzy and weak. He clings to the wall, the world spinning around him, a bitter, self-mocking smile on his lips. His grand escape has lasted less than a minute. Defeated by his own frail body, he turns and trudges back to his room, defeated, and walks directly into Razumikin, who has just returned. His friend's face is a mask of pure terror and fury. "You went out," Razumikin bellows. "You dared, in your condition." He grabs Raskolnikov by the shoulders, his concern so intense it manifests as rage. He scolds him, like a naughty child, threatening to tie him to his sofa if he tries such a stunt again. Raskolnikov submits without a word, a strange, weary calm settling over him. He has made his stand, however pathetic, and is now content to once again surrender to the care of his friend. It is at this moment, as Razumikin is still fuming and Raskolnikov has just settled back onto his sofa, that there is a knock at the door. The visitor is a man they have never seen before. He is about 35, of medium height, slightly stout, and dressed with a neat, almost dapper respectability. He has a round, slightly snub-nosed face, and a fresh, pleasant complexion, but his most notable feature is his eyes. They are light-colored and liquid, with a strange, watery glitter, and they seem to look at everything with a calm, penetrating, and vaguely unsettling curiosity. The man introduces himself with an air of polite, almost cheerful, deference. He is Porfiry Petrovitch, a distant relative of Razumikin's, and he claims he has just dropped by to finally make the acquaintance of the famous Rodion Romanovich, of whom he has heard so much. Raskolnikov feels a jolt, A surge of cold electricity that cuts through his weariness. He knows this name. Rascalnikov had mentioned it. Porfiry Petrovich is an examining magistrate, an investigator for the police. This is no friendly social call. This is not a coincidence. A profound and terrifying certainty dawns on Rascalnikov. Porfiry knows. He knows about his fainting spell at the station. He knows about his strange conversation with Samyotov. He knows that he was one of the pawnbroker's last clients. This seemingly pleasant, unassuming man is the enemy. He is the hunter. And Rascalnikov is his prey. The great, silent, and deadly game has just officially begun. The initial conversation is a masterpiece of veiled intention, a dance of polite, intellectual chatter, layered over a current of deep and deadly suspicion. Porfiry is affable, almost charming. He compliments Rascalnikov. He asks about his health. He engages in a light-hearted debate with the oblivious Rascalnikov about the nature of crime and the limits of the law. Rascalnikov responds in clipped, cautious monosyllables, his mind racing, trying to parse every word, every gesture, for a hidden meaning, a trap. He is a fence, warily testing the defenses of a master opponent. Rascalnikov, bless his simple heart, notices none of the tension. He chatters away, providing Porfiry with a wealth of information about his friend's poverty, his pride, his recent illness, and his dark, melancholic moods, unknowingly handing the investigator the very psychological tools he will need to dissect Rascalnikov's soul. Porfiry steers the conversation, with a seemingly casual and meandering logic, towards a specific topic, an article that Rascalnikov had written some months ago. An article Porfiry had just happened to read. An article, he says with a curious, watery smile, on the subject of crime. Rascalnikov's blood runs cold. He feels the net tightening. The friendly mask of the investigator has slipped for just an instant, revealing the keen, calculating mind beneath. He is no longer just a person of interest. He is the subject of a specific, target and deeply intelligent investigation. The battle has been joined, here, in this tiny, squalid room. And Rascalnikov knows that he is now fighting not just for his freedom, but for the very survival of his extraordinary idea, against a man who seems to understand the workings of his mind better than anyone he has ever met. The name of the article hangs in the air of the small room, a single, carefully chosen phrase that has instantly transformed this supposedly casual meeting into a formal interrogation. Rascalnikov feels a jolt of cold, sharp clarity. The remnants of his feverish delirium are burned away by a surge of adrenaline. He's not just a suspect, he's an author, a theorist, whose ideas have preceded him. And while this is terrifying, it also appeals to his immense and wounded pride. He's not being investigated as a common thief, but as a man of intellect, a man whose very thoughts are considered dangerous. This unspoken flattery gives him a strange, sudden surge of strength. He prepares himself for the duel, his mind a razor's edge. Porfiry Petrovich, the investigator, begins his attack with a masterful display of false modesty and intellectual curiosity. He claims he's just a humble jurist. Fascinated and a little confused by Rascalnikov's brilliant but complex article, he smiles his watery, unsettling smile and asks Rascalnikov if he would be so kind as to explain his central thesis. All this talk of some people having a right to do wrong, it's all so original, so fascinating. Rascalnikov, completely oblivious to the deadly subtext of the conversation, jumps in with his typical boisterous energy. He confirms that Rascalnikov did indeed write such an article, though he himself hasn't read it. He serves as the perfect unwitting pawn, an honest voice that gives the entire proceeding a veneer of normalcy, a normalcy that only makes the underlying tension more acute. Caught in Porfiry's gentle but inescapable trap, Rascalnikov has no choice but to engage, to defend his life's great idea. He begins to explain his theory, and as he speaks, his earlier caution is replaced by the passionate, arrogant energy of a lecturer. He explains the division of mankind into the ordinary and the extraordinary. The ordinary masses, he says, are the material, the lice, whose purpose is to obey and reproduce, but the extraordinary, the geniuses, the Napoleons, are the movers of history. They have an inner right to transgress, to step over any obstacle, even a mound of bodies, if it's necessary for the fulfillment of their world-changing idea, their new word. For them, he argues, law is a flimsy human construct. and what society calls a crime is merely a necessary act of creation. Razumikhin listens to this explanation with a growing sense of horror. This isn't the friend he knows, this is a man espousing a cold, monstrous, and blood-chilling philosophy. What are you saying? He stammers, his face flushing with disbelief and moral outrage. You mean they have a right to do this, to go after people? He argues passionately against the idea, calling it more terrible than any officially sanctioned system of law. It is, he shouts, a formal permission to do wrong. An idea that would unleash untold chaos upon the world. He is the voice of humanity in the room, the voice of simple, decent morality, recoiling from the cold, inhuman logic of Rascalnikov's pride. His outrage serves Porfiry's purpose perfectly, highlighting the truly dangerous implications of the theory for everyone in the room. Porfiry watches this exchange with a look of calm, almost amused, fascination, letting Razumikhin's emotional outburst do the work for him. When his friend is finished, the investigator turns his watery, penetrating gaze back to Rascalnikov and begins to probe. His questions are like a surgeon's scalpels, gentle in their application but designed to cut deep. And how, exactly, can we distinguish these extraordinary people from the ordinary ones? He asks, with a pleasant smile. Are they born with some special mark? Rascalnikov, irritated but still composed, replies that there is no mark, that the distinction lies within the soul and the intellect, that nature itself is messy and often produces a genius in the wrong place. Porfiry nods, a thoughtful, encouraging expression on his face, before delivering his next, more pointed question. That's all very clever, he says, but tell me this. There must be a great many people who imagine themselves to be extraordinary, who believe they have the right to act, and this could be quite dangerous, couldn't it? Rascalnikov, with a flash of contempt, explains that this is indeed a danger, but that the true extraordinary man will, in the end, make himself a whip and scourge himself if he is wrong, that true genius comes with its own terrible burden of suffering. He speaks with a chilling, first-hand authority, describing his own psychological torment without even realizing it. And then Porfiry, with the timing of a master strategist, asks the question that has been lurking beneath the entire conversation. Tell me, Rodion Romanovich, he says, his voice still light and casual, when you were writing your article, surely you couldn't have helped but consider yourself just a little bit to be one of these extraordinary people, could you? The question is a direct strike at the heart of Rascalnikov's being. A demand that he declare himself. Rascalnikov sees the trap instantly. To admit it would be a confession of motive. To deny it would be a betrayal of his entire philosophy. Of his own pride, he stares back at Porfiry, a cold, defiant smile playing on his lips, and gives an answer that is no answer at all. It's quite possible, he says, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He refuses to be pinned down, turning Porfiry's psychological probe into a joke. The tension in the room is so thick it feels like a physical presence. Having pushed the theoretical discussion as far as it can go, Porfiry abruptly and masterfully changes tactics. He suddenly becomes a simple, workaday police official. Concerned with mundane, practical matters, he mentions, almost as an afterthought, that the police are asking anyone who had pledges with the deceased pawnbroker to come to the station to identify their property. This is a direct, practical hook, a line cast directly at Rascalnikov, who he knows had several items, including a ring and his father's watch, with the old woman. The interview seems to be over. Porfiry gets up to leave, the mood in the room lightening as Razumikhin chatters on. But just as he reaches the door, the investigator turns back, as if having forgotten one last trivial detail. Oh, just one more thing, he says, his voice casual. On your last visit to the old woman's apartment, you know, the one 3 days before the event, did you happen to see any painters at work in the building on the second floor? The question is a thunderclap, a perfectly constructed, absolutely brilliant trap. Rascalnikov's mind races. He knows for a fact that there were no painters in the building 3 days before. They were only there on the day of the deed itself. Porfiry is bluffing, presenting him with a false memory to see if he will fall into it, to see if he will reveal knowledge that only the culprit could possess. He understands the trap completely, and a cold, triumphant, and defiant response is already forming on his lips. He is ready to parry this final, masterful thrust, and win the duel. But before he can speak, his loyal, clumsy, and well-intentioned friend, Razumikhin, commits a catastrophic blunder. Wanting to help, wanting to prove his friend's innocence, he blurts out, "Painters," but there weren't any painters there 3 days before. They were there on the very day of the event, when he was going up the stairs. Razumikin has, in his desperate attempt to be helpful, just confirmed to the investigator that Rascalnikov was indeed at the scene of the crime on the day it was committed. A piece of information Porfiry had only been guessing at. The trap has been sprung, not by Rascalnikov's mistake, but by his friend's loyalty. The first great duel is over. Porfiry Petrovitch leaves with another polite smile. Having gotten everything he wanted, he has not only confirmed his prime suspect's connection to the scene, but he has taken a deep, extensive tour of the man's soul. He understands the theory, the psychological makeup of the person he is hunting. Rascalnikov is left standing in the middle of his room, his brief sense of triumph turned to ash. He is furious with Razumikin, but he is more furious with himself for underestimating his opponent. He now knows that he is not dealing with a common police functionary. He is dealing with a man who is his intellectual equal, a man who has already cast a subtle, intricate, and deeply psychological net around him. The click of the closing door behind Porfiry Petrovitch seems to echo for an eternity in the silent room. Rascalnikov stands frozen, his mind replaying every word, every glance, every subtle shift in the investigator's tone. The triumphant feeling of having parried the man's questions has evaporated, leaving behind the cold, metallic taste of fear. He now understands the true nature of the game he's in. It's not a battle of evidence, of facts and clues, but a war of psychology. A slow, methodical dissection of his soul, and he is furious with Razumikin, whose clumsy loyal outburst has confirmed a key suspicion. But he's even more furious with himself for having been drawn into the duel in the first place. He pushes his friend away with harsh words, demanding to be left alone. His solitude is once again his only refuge, a fortress where he can try to rebuild his shattered defenses. He lies on his wretched sofa, his thoughts a chaotic storm, trying to find a path through the intricate web Porfiry has woven around him. But his tormented introspection is soon interrupted by another knock on the door. He expects it to be the returning Razumikin, but the man who enters is a complete stranger. A man of about 50, tall, well-built, and impeccably dressed in fashionable, light-colored summer clothes. His face is handsome, almost mask-like in its pleasantness, with fresh, rosy cheeks and startlingly bright blue eyes that have a cold, hard, and deeply unsettling stare. There's an air of predatory confidence about him, a look of a man accustomed to getting exactly what he wants. Rascalnikov has never seen him before, but he knows, with a jolt of ice in his veins, exactly who this is. It can only be one person, Arkady Ivanovich Svidrigalov. Svidrigalov enters the squalid room as if stepping into a private box at the theater. His gaze sweeps over the yellowed walls and the miserable furniture with a kind of detached, aristocratic amusement. He introduces himself with an unnerving, almost cheerful politeness, as if he were paying a friendly social call on an old acquaintance. Rascalnikov stares back at him, his heart pounding with a mixture of hatred and morbid curiosity. This is the man who tormented his sister, the man whose depravity is the root cause of her engagement delusion, is the villain of his family's story. A creature of pure, unadulterated selfishness, and yet here he is, smiling, pleasant, and utterly devoid of shame. Rascalnikov feels an immediate, visceral revulsion, but also a strange, unwilling fascination. He is looking at a man who has truly stepped over all moral barriers, a man who lives completely outside the bounds of good and evil. Svidrigalov states his purpose directly. He has come to St. Petersburg to see Dunya. He says he regrets the unpleasantness that occurred in the country and wishes to make amends. He wants to offer her a gift of 10,000 rubles, a vast sum of money, with no strings attached. He claims he wants to do this to prevent her from making the disastrous mistake of marrying the contemptible Pyotr Petrovitch Lushin, whom he despises. The offer is stunning in its audacity. It's a transparent attempt to buy Dunya's favor, to place her in his debt. Rascalnikov sees it for what it is. Another, more sophisticated form of assault, a continuation of the predatory pursuit that drove her from his home in the first place. He coldly refuses to have any part in it, forbidding Svidrigalov from ever meeting with his sister. The conversation then takes a bizarre, almost supernatural turn. Svidrigalov speaks of the recent and very sudden passing of his wife, Marfa Petrovna. He recounts the details with a chilling, clinical detachment, as if discussing a minor household inconvenience, and then with a casual, conversational tone, he mentions that her ghost has been visiting him. He describes her spectral appearances in minute, mundane detail. She comes, he says, for trivial reasons, to complain about the weather or to comment on his cravat. He discusses the existence of ghosts and the afterlife with the detached curiosity of a bored philosopher, concluding that eternity might not be some grand, noble vista, but perhaps just a small, grimy bathhouse in the country, full of spiders, a vision of the afterlife so squalid and meaningless it perfectly reflects his own empty soul. Rascalnikov listens to this, transfixed. This is the great biographical agony of the novel made manifest. For in Svidrigalov, he sees a dark and terrifying reflection of himself. Svidrigalov is the living embodiment of the extraordinary man theory. He is a man who has allowed his conscience to step over every obstacle, who has pursued his own desires without regard for any moral law. And the result is not greatness, not a new word for humanity, but a profound and soul-crushing boredom, an emptiness so complete that even the appearance of ghosts is just another tedious diversion. Svidrigalov is what Rascalnikov could become if he were to fully succeed, a man for whom nothing matters, for whom all actions are permissible, and for whom life itself has become a cheap, vulgar, and ultimately meaningless spectacle. This encounter is, in its own way, more terrifying than his duel with Porfiry. The investigator is an external threat, a hunter from the outside world, but Svidrigalov is an internal one, a specter from his own soul, a vision of his own potential future. Rascalnikov is both repulsed by him and inextricably drawn to him. He sees in Svidrigalov's cold blue eyes the terrifying answer to his own great question. The transgression of moral law does not lead to a higher state of being, it leads to a grimy bathhouse full of spiders. It leads to a world where everything, even the supernatural, is just another symptom of a terminal case of ennui. Svidrigalov continues. Unperturbed by Rascalnikov's hostility, he speaks of his upcoming second marriage, to a very young, almost childlike, 16-year-old girl, a match that is both pathetic and predatory. He discusses his appetites, his travels, his complete and utter lack of purpose, with a frankness that is both disarming and deeply obscene. He is a man who has seen everything, done everything, and is now simply looking for new sensations to distract him from the great, yawning void at the center of his being. He is the ultimate nihilist, a man who has deconstructed all morality and found nothing on the other side but a profound and eternal boredom. The meeting concludes as strangely as it began. Svidrigalov, seeing that Rascalnikov will not help him, prepares to leave. He is not angry, not insulted, merely amused by the young man's passionate intensity. As he stands in the doorway, he turns back to Rascalnikov and says, with a chilling, conspiratorial smile, that he knew Rascalnikov would be an interesting man to meet. Because they have, he says, something in common. The words hang in the air, a quiet, terrible acknowledgement of the dark kinship between them, the kinship of two men who have both dared to believe they could live beyond good and evil. Svidrigalov leaves, and Rascalnikov is left alone. His mind reeling, the encounter has shaken him more deeply than any police interrogation ever could. He has just looked into the face of his own theory, and what he saw there was not the proud, noble visage of a Napoleon, but the empty, jaded, and slightly bored face of a predator. The duel with Porfiry was a battle of wits, a game of intellectual chess. But this was something far more terrifying. It was a glimpse into his own potential damnation. A vision of what happens when a man successfully cuts himself off from the human hive, not to become a god but to become a ghost, haunting the grimy corners of his own empty, meaningless eternity. The presence of Svidrigalov leaves a toxic residue in the air, a spiritual poison that clings to the yellow walls of Rascalnikov's room. He feels contaminated, as if he has just spent an hour breathing in the fumes from a moral graveyard. The man's cheerful, immoral nihilism, his vision of eternity as a grimy bathhouse full of spiders, is not just a philosophical position, it's a spiritual contagion, and Rascalnikov feels an overwhelming, desperate need to find an antidote. to wash the man's chilling emptiness from his soul. He agrees to go with Razumkin to a party, a move of pure social instinct, a need to be surrounded by the noise and warmth of other people. But on the way, a different, more powerful compulsion takes hold of him. He breaks away from his friend, promising to follow later, and turns his steps towards the squalid, crumbling tenements where the Marmaladov family lives. He needs to see Sonia. His decision isn't a rational one, it's an instinct, a desperate, unconscious pilgrimage towards the only person he has met who seems to represent an opposing truth to the one Svidrigalov embodies. He finds her lodgings in a large, dilapidated building, in a room rented from a tailor named Kapernamov. The space itself is a reflection of its occupant. It's a large, irregularly shaped room, almost bare of furniture, with 3 windows looking out onto the bleak, murky water of the canal. There is a bed, a chair, a plain wooden table, and a small chest of drawers. The room is clean, but it has a desolate, almost empty feeling, a space stripped down to its bare essentials, much like Sonia herself. She is at home when he arrives, and she is utterly terrified by his sudden appearance. She stands before him, small, thin, and timid, her light blue eyes wide with a mixture of fear and embarrassment. He is an educated man, a gentleman, and in her own mind, she is a creature of the lowest social order, a pariah. He sees her shame, her profound and painful humility, and it unleashes a strange, almost cruel energy within him. He does not offer comfort, he begins to probe, to test, to torment her. His questions are like a surgeon's knife, cutting away at the fragile defenses of her soul. He speaks of her stepmother, Katerina Ivanovna, telling Sonia that the woman's consumption is incurable, that she is on the brink of madness and will soon be gone. He asks her, with a cold, analytical cruelty, what will then become of the children? Especially the young Polekka. Will she be forced onto the same path? Will she have to take up the yellow ticket to survive? He paints a future of such bleak, unavoidable horror that Sonia can barely stand to hear it. He is testing her faith, pushing her, trying to see at what point her belief in God will shatter against the brutal, unanswerable reality of her suffering. He presents her with what he sees as the only 3 logical choices for a person in her hopeless position: to throw herself into the canal, to end up in a madhouse, or, he says, to finally throw herself into a depravity that stupefies the mind and hardens the heart. He is describing the 3 paths that lie before him as well, the paths of self-destruction, madness, or a Svidrigalov-like embrace of amorality. Sonia listens to his cold, nihilistic logic, her face a mask of silent anguish. She is trembling, unable to form a response, and then, when he has pushed her to the very brink of despair, she whispers the words that will change everything. But God, she says, her voice barely audible, God will not allow it. It is a statement of such simple, unshakable, and to Rascalnikov's mind, irrational faith, that it stops him cold. His entire intellectual arsenal, his complex theories, his logical proofs of a meaningless universe, are all rendered powerless by this one, quiet, childlike assertion. He sees in that moment that she possesses a truth, a strength that he cannot touch with his logic, a strength that comes not from the mind, but from the soul. His gaze falls upon a book lying on her chest of drawers. It is a worn, leather-bound copy of the New Testament. He asks her where it came from, and she tells him, her voice still trembling, that it was given to her by Lizaveta Ivanovna, the gentle, pious sister of the old pawnbroker, the second victim of his terrible act. The name strikes Rascalnikov with the force of a physical blow, a chilling, supernatural coincidence that seems to bind him, Sonia, and his own crime together in an unbreakable, fated triangle. He feels a shiver run down his spine. It is as if the universe itself is conspiring to bring him to this very room, to this very moment, to this very book. He feels a new and urgent purpose. He takes the book and commands her, his voice low and intense, to find the story of the raising of Lazarus, and to read it to him. Sonia hesitates. She is ashamed to read before him, this strange, terrifying, and brilliant gentleman. She feels unworthy. But there is something in his eyes, a desperate, almost mad intensity, that she cannot refuse. She opens the book to the Gospel of John, and she begins to read. At first, her voice is weak, faltering. She struggles with the words. But as she gets deeper into the story, a change comes over her. She is no longer just a timid, shamed girl. She is a vessel for the story. Her voice gains a new strength, a ringing, passionate power that fills the desolate room. She reads of Lazarus, a man who was sick, a man who had been dead and buried in a tomb for 4 days, a man whose body had already begun to decay. She reads of Martha's doubt, her logical, rational belief that it is too late, that there is no hope. And as she reads, Rascalnikov listens, his body leaning forward, his eyes fixed on her face. He is not just hearing a story, he is hearing a diagnosis and a prophecy. He is Lazarus. He has been dead for far more than 4 days. He has been lying in the stone-cold tomb of his own theory, wrapped in the burial cloths of his own pride and intellectual arrogance, the stench of his spiritual decay filling the small coffin of his room. He is the rationalist, like Martha, who believes that it is too late, that there can be no miracle, that the laws of nature and logic are absolute. And then Sonia reads the words of Christ, the command that cuts through all logic, all despair, all laws of nature. Lazarus, come forth, she reads, her voice trembling with a triumphant, ecstatic faith. And he that was dead came forth. The story hangs in the silence of the room, a profound and direct challenge to everything Rascalnikov believes. It is the story of the ultimate transgression, not of man's law, but of nature's. The story of a resurrection that cannot be explained by reason, a miracle born of pure and adulterated faith. It is the one possibility that his entire worldview cannot account for. The possibility of redemption, of a new life, of a soul being called forth from the tomb. He looks at Sonia, who is trembling, her face illuminated by the fervor of her own belief, and he sees the path. He sees the terrible, agonizing, and yet strangely hopeful choice that now lies before him. Svidrigalov had shown him the abyss, the meaningless end of a man without God. But Sonia, with this ancient story, has just shown him the impossible path upward. He gets up to leave, his mind reeling, he tells her, his voice low and full of a new, strange intimacy, that he has abandoned his family. But he will not abandon her. He looks at her and says the words that finally bind them together. We are accursed together, so we will go together. He sees them as 2 great sinners, 2 transgressors. She for selling her body, he for taking a life, and he believes their shared damnation is their only bond. Sonia recoils in horror, unable to comprehend his meaning, unable to see her own selfless sacrifice as a sin comparable to his mysterious dark transgression. Before he leaves, he promises that he will return the next day, and when he does, he will tell her who it was that ended Lizaveta's life. He walks out of her room and into the darkening street, leaving her in a state of terror and confusion. He has not confessed, but he has done something far more significant. He has found the person he will confess to. The encounter with Svidrigalov showed him the damnation he was running towards. But his meeting with Sonia has shown him the only possible path to salvation, a path not of intellectual pride, but of shared suffering, of faith, and of the terrifying miraculous possibility of a soul being called back from the dead. Leaving Sonia's room is like stepping from a dimly lit chapel back into a chaotic and godless world. Rascalnikov's soul is in a state of profound turmoil. The cold, hard certainty of his theory has been fractured by the simple, unwavering faith of a girl he considers a fellow transgressor. The story of Lazarus echoes in his mind, not as a fable, but as a terrifying and deeply personal challenge. The possibility of resurrection, of a life beyond the tomb of his own making, is a concept so alien to his worldview that it leaves him feeling dizzy and unmoored. He is on his way to meet Rascalnikov, to go to Porfiry's for what is supposed to be a simple party, but he knows it's not. It's a summons, another round in his silent, deadly war with the investigator. And he walks there not with the cold resolve of a Napoleon, but with the agitated, anxious energy of a man whose entire reality has been thrown into question. They arrive at Porfiry Petrovitch's apartment, a modest, government-issue flat, and find the investigator alone. Rascalnikov is immediately on high alert, sensing that the casual party was merely a pretext for this one-on-one confrontation. Porfiry is, as always, unnervingly cheerful. He greets them with a flurry of pleasantries, but there's a new, sharper edge to his demeanor, a predatory glint in his watery eyes. He tells Rascalnikov that he has a little surprise for him, a special something waiting just for him behind the partition that separates his office from his living quarters. The statement is delivered with a playful smile, but it lands like a physical threat. Raskolnikov's mind races. A witness, he thinks, some piece of evidence they've found. The suspense is a form of torture in itself, a deliberate tactic to unnerve him before the real interrogation even begins. What follows is not a direct questioning, but a long, meandering and brilliant monologue from Porfiry. It's a masterclass in psychological warfare. He speaks about modern criminal investigation, about how outdated methods of evidence and witnesses are nothing compared to the power of psychology. A truly clever culprit, he explains. A man of intellect and theory can't be caught with simple traps. Instead, the investigator must play a game of the mind. He must give the man rope. Let him run, let him believe he's in control, all the while subtly guiding him, creating a sense of inescapable pressure until his own nerves betray him. He talks about the moth that is irresistibly drawn to the flame of a candle. He is, of course, describing Raskolnikov's own behavior back to him. His visit to the crime scene, his fainting spell, his bizarre conversation with Zamyotov. Every word is a veiled accusation, a quiet turning of the screw. Raskolnikov listens, his body rigid, his face a pale, sweat-sheened mask of controlled fury. He understands Porfiry's game perfectly. He sees the cheap theatricality of the surprise behind the partition and is filled with a profound contempt. But he's also terrified. He feels like an insect being pinned to a board by a calm, smiling, and deeply intelligent entomologist. Porfiry's words are a mirror, showing him not just his actions, but the very psychological compulsions that drove them. He feels his composure beginning to crack, the pressure inside his head building to an unbearable level. He can feel a scream of pure, hysterical rage rising in his throat. He is about to leap up, to either confess or to strike the man, to do something to end this excruciating mental torture. But just as the tension reaches its absolute breaking point, just as Porfiry leans in to deliver what feels like the final, killing blow, the scene is shattered by a sudden, violent interruption. There's a commotion in the hallway. The door to the apartment bursts open, and a pale, disheveled young man stumbles into the room, followed by several police officers. It is Nikolai Demendiev, the simple house painter, who had been the prime suspect. His face is ashen, his eyes wide with a kind of religious, ecstatic terror, and before anyone can read, he throws himself to his knees in the middle of the floor, his voice ringing with a desperate, soul-shaking conviction. "I am the one," he cries. "I am guilty. The transgression was mine." The room explodes into chaos. Porfiry Petrovich is, for the first time, completely and utterly stunned. His jaw drops, his carefully constructed psychological trap, his brilliant interrogation, his little surprise, all of it has been utterly demolished by this single, irrational, and completely unforeseen event. He stares at the kneeling painter with a look of pure, dumbfounded disbelief. Rozumikhin, on the other hand, is ecstatic. He bellows with triumph, seeing this as the definitive, miraculous proof of his friend's innocence. He claps Raskolnikov on the back, vindicated and overjoyed. Raskolnikov himself is perhaps the strangest figure in the room. He is saved, miraculously, impossibly saved. But he feels no joy, no relief. Only a profound and bewildering sense of dislocation. He watches the scene as if it were a play, a bizarre, absurd drama in which he is no longer the main character. He gets up to leave, his mind a numb, buzzing void. Porfiry, still reeling, weakly tells him to go. That they will see each other again. Raskolnikov stumbles out of the building and into the street, his legs unsteady, his mind trying to process the sheer, impossible absurdity of what has just happened. He has been subjected to a masterful psychological assault, brought to the very edge of the abyss, only to be pulled back at the last possible second by a literal deus ex machina, a false confession born of a simple man's religious mania. His rational worldview is being systematically dismantled, not by logic, but by a series of events, so random and miraculous, they feel like the work of a cosmic trickster. As he stands by the gate, trying to catch his breath, a figure emerges from the shadows of the doorway. It's a man, a tradesman, who had been in the crowd of onlookers during Nikolai's confession. The man approaches Raskolnikov, his own face pale and filled with a look of profound suffering guilt. He bows his head and whispers, his voice trembling. "Forgive me." Raskolnikov stares at him, uncomprehending, and the man explains. He reveals that he was the surprise. He was the unexpected visitor that Porfiry had hidden behind the partition. He was the man who had seen Rascalnikov at the apartment building on the day of the event and had reported him to the police. Porfiry had brought him there to identify Rascalnikov, to be the final damning piece of his psychological puzzle. The tradesman now believes he has slandered an innocent man, that he has contributed to the suffering of Rascalnikov, and he is begging for forgiveness. The final bitter irony of the situation crashes down on Rascalnikov with its full weight. He now knows exactly what Porfiry's trap was, how close he came to being caught, and how Nikolai's bizarre interruption has not only saved him, but has seemingly cleared his name completely in the eyes of his only known accuser. He is, for all intents and purposes, a free man. The suspicion has been lifted, the net has been cut, but he has never felt more trapped, more entangled, more utterly and hopelessly a prisoner. He walks away, leaving the tradesman bowing in the street, his mind reeling from the sheer chaotic madness of it all. He is alone again, but the nature of his solitude has changed. He is no longer the proud, isolated theorist, secure in his own intellectual fortress. He is a man adrift on a sea of irrationality. A world where his logic is useless. A world of weeping prostitutes, talking ghosts. While Rascalnikov is adrift in a sea of miracles and psychological traps, his would-be brother-in-law, Pyotr Petrovich Luzhin, is stewing in a state of profound and wounded vanity. His carefully planned engagement to Dunya is in tatters, and he has been personally humiliated, not just by his fiancée's family, but by a ragged, half-mad student. His pride, which is the very core of his being, has been deeply insulted, and he now burns with a cold, methodical desire for revenge, a desire to reassert his own importance and to utterly destroy the reputation of the young man who has so thoroughly thwarted him. He is staying in a cheap room with a young intellectual, Andrei Semyonovich Lebeednikov, a man Luzhin secretly despises but finds useful. Lebeednikov is a caricature of the new progressive man, a fool spouting half-digested theories about social communes, rational egoism, and the rights of women. And it is through him that Luzhin has a connection to his new neighbor, a quiet, timid young woman named Sonia Marmaladov. It is Sonia who pulls Rascalnikov back from the brink of his own obsessive thoughts. He receives a note from her, a simple, almost childlike invitation to attend the funeral dinner for her father. An event paid for with the very money Rascalnikov had given them. He feels a strange, almost unwilling sense of obligation, a morbid curiosity to see the final act of the Marmaladov family's tragedy play out. And so, despite his own exhaustion and mental turmoil, he goes, stepping once again from the isolation of his own drama into the raw, chaotic, and deeply human world of their suffering, a world he is beginning to understand is inextricably linked with his own. The scene that greets him at the Marmaladovs is one of breathtaking, tragic absurdity. Katerina Ivanovna, in a final, desperate performance of her past gentility, has transformed their squalid, cramped room into a banquet hall. She has spent nearly half of the money Rascalnikov gave her on this single pathetic event. The table is laden with a bizarre and meager assortment of dishes, cheap vodka and rum. She herself is dressed in her best, threadbare dress, her cheeks flushed with the bright, unnatural red of her illness, her eyes glittering with a manic, feverish excitement. She is playing the part of the grand hostess, the dignified officer's daughter, greeting her guests with an air of strained, aristocratic grace. But the guests themselves are a testament to her utter desolation. They are a motley collection of the poorest and most downtrodden tenants from the building. A stammering Pole, a deaf-mute old woman, some lowly clerks, all of them shy, awkward, and clearly uncomfortable. They are not her peers, they are her fellow sufferers, and she cannot stand it. Her performance as the gracious hostess quickly begins to crack, her grief and her pride curdling into a kind of hysterical, condescending rage. She alternates between making delusional speeches about her plans to open a boarding school for the daughters of noblemen in her hometown, and viciously insulting her lowly guests for their lack of table manners and their pathetic, humble origins. It is a spectacle of profound, almost unbearable pathos. A woman trying to rebuild the palace of her past with the rubble of her present. The entire event teeters on the brink of collapse, held together only by the fragile thread of Katerina Ivanovna's will. The main source of conflict is the landlady, a foolish and pretentious German woman named Amalia Ivanovna, who Katerina Ivanovna despises, but was forced to invite the two women engage in a bitter, ridiculous war of social one-upmanship, arguing about their respective lineages, their father's importance, and the proper way to conduct a respectable funeral dinner. It is a clash of two immense and deeply wounded egos, a tragicomic battle over the scraps of their lost dignity. Rascalnikov watches it all with a kind of weary detachment, a silent observer at this feast of sorrows. Sonia tries in vain to soothe her stepmother, but she is too timid, too gentle to have any effect. She can only watch, her face a mask of quiet, helpless anguish. It is into this maelstrom of petty squabbles and profound grief that Pyotr Petrovitch Luzhin makes his grand entrance. His appearance is a shock. He is impeccably dressed, his clothes pristine, his manner cold, formal, and utterly out of place. He looks around the chaotic room with an expression of barely concealed disgust, as if he has just stepped into a cage at the zoo. He has not come to pay his respects. He has come as an accuser. He has a plan, a cruel and carefully constructed scheme to destroy Sonia's reputation and by extension to wound the Rascalnikov family. He ignores the frantic hostess, Katerina Ivanovna, and speaks only to Sonia, whom he had summoned here earlier under a false pretext. His presence casts a sudden chilling silence over the room. Everyone can sense that he is here, not as a guest but as an executioner. Rascalnikov watches him with a cold, unwavering stare. He knows this man. He understands the petty, vindictive nature of his soul. He knows that Luzhin is incapable of a single act of genuine kindness. And he feels a surge of protective dread for Sonia, who stands before her accuser, small, terrified, and utterly defenseless. Luzhin speaks with a formal, self-important air, making a show of his supposed charity, but his eyes are cold, and his words are laced with a barely concealed contempt. He is laying the groundwork for his attack, positioning himself as the respectable, magnanimous gentleman, a role that makes the cruelty he is about to unleash all the more monstrous. The dinner, and Katerina Ivanovna's desperate attempt at dignity, finally and completely collapses. Enraged by a final foolish insult from the landlady, Katerina Ivanovna flies into a screaming rage. She throws a glass at the woman. She shrieks about her noble birth, her voice cracking, as her tirade dissolves into a terrible racking fit of coughing, spitting up blood into her handkerchief. The guests, horrified by the scene, begin to scatter. The pathetic party is over, leaving behind only the wreckage of broken dreams and the bitter taste of humiliation. Katerina Ivanovna, her last performance, a catastrophic failure, is in a state of complete and utter collapse, her mind finally giving way to the madness that has been hovering at its edges for so long. Rascalnikov remains, a silent witness to the carnage. He watches the family's final implosion with a heavy heart. But his eyes keep returning to Luzhin, who has observed the entire disaster with a look of cold, satisfied detachment. Rascalnikov knows that this was not the man's true purpose for coming here. The public chaos was merely an overture. The real, calculated act of cruelty is still to come. The stage is now perfectly set. The victim, Sonia, is isolated and terrified. The audience is gone, and the accuser, Pyotr Petrovitch Luzhin, is ready to deliver his final devastating blow. A blow aimed not just at the poor, shamed girl before him, but at the pride of the entire Rascalnikov family. The chaotic collapse of the funeral dinner has left the room in a state of emotional wreckage. Katerina Ivanovna stands amidst the debris of her final pathetic performance. Her body racked with coughing, her mind finally succumbing to the feverish madness that has long threatened her. The pathetic guests have scattered, leaving only a core group of witnesses to the family's final implosion. It is into this vacuum of despair that Pyotr Petrovitch Luzhin, who has been observing the disaster with a look of cold, reptilian satisfaction, finally makes his move. He steps forward, his voice a blade of ice cutting through the heated air, and the room falls into a sudden, shocked silence. He does not speak to the hysterical Katerina Ivanovna or to the watchful Rascalnikov. He addresses himself only to Sonia, who stands trembling, a small, terrified figure in the center of the room. He speaks with the pompous, self-important tone of a man delivering a grave and formal pronouncement. He states that earlier that day, when he had invited Sonia to his room to discuss a small matter of charity, a 100-ruble banknote had vanished from his table. He claims, initially dismissed it, but upon reflection, He has no choice but to conclude that she, Sofia Semyonovna, has taken it. He formally accuses her of theft. The accusation is so monstrous, so utterly out of place in this room already saturated with grief, that for a moment no one can even process it. Katerina Ivanovna is the first to react. A surge of pure primal fury, cutting through her grief-stricken madness, she unleashes a torrent of rage and disbelief. How dare this pompous, preening man accuse her Sonia, her meek, gentle, suffering Sonia, of being a common thief? She rushes to Sonia's side, not just as a defender, but as a lioness protecting her cub. She declares that she will search Sonia herself, right here, right now, to prove her innocence and to expose the shameless slander of her accuser. She begins to frantically, almost violently, turn Sonia's pockets inside out, her movements fueled by a righteous, hysterical indignation. She is so certain of her daughter's innocence that she herself will provide the proof. Sonia, for her part, is a statue of pure, silent terror. She is incapable of speech, incapable of defense. Her face is a white mask of disbelief. She submits to her stepmother's frantic search without a word. Her mind unable to comprehend the nightmare that is unfolding around her, Katerina Ivanovna empties one pocket, then the other, and then, from the folds of her dress, a small, neatly folded piece of paper flutters to the floor. It is a 100-ruble banknote. For a long, terrible moment, there is a profound and absolute silence in the room. The kind of silence that follows a gunshot. The proof lies on the dirty floorboards, an undeniable, irrefutable condemnation. Luzhin allows himself a small, triumphant smile. His plan has worked perfectly. He has his revenge. Katerina Ivanovna stares at the banknote, then at Sonia, her face a canvas of utter, soul-crushing devastation. Her fierce, protective rage evaporates, replaced by a look of bewildered horror. For one terrible moment, her own faith in her daughter is shattered. She cannot understand, she cannot believe, but the evidence is there. Sonia, seeing the look on her stepmother's face, lets out a low, mournful cry, a sound of pure, unadulterated anguish. She is not just an accused thief, she is now utterly and completely alone, abandoned even by the one person whose honor she was trying to protect. It is a moment of absolute, bottomless despair, a spiritual annihilation so complete that Rascalnikov, watching from the corner, feels a cold sickness grip his own heart. But just as Luzhin is savoring his victory, a new voice cuts through the silence. It is the voice of Andrei Semyonovich Lebeziatnikov, Luzhin's young, foolish, but ultimately good-hearted roommate. He steps forward, trembling, his face pale with a mixture of fear and righteous indignation. He is terrified of his powerful roommate, terrified of making a scene, but his own simple, almost childlike sense of justice will not allow him to remain silent. What a vile and infamous act! He stammers, his voice shaking but clear. He points a trembling finger at Luzhin, and he reveals the truth. He says that he saw it. With his own 2 eyes, he saw Pyotr Petrovitch, as Sonia was leaving his room, secretly and discreetly slip the folded banknote into her pocket. Lebeziatnikov explains that at the time, he had misunderstood the gesture. He thought it was a clumsy, anonymous act of charity, a secret gift from a respectable gentleman to a poor, unfortunate girl. He had even praised Luzhin for his progressive, humanitarian ideals, but now, seeing the public accusation, he understands the horrifying, malicious intent behind the act. He understands that he has been an unwitting witness to a cruel and despicable frame-up. His testimony, delivered with the passionate, slightly comical sincerity of a true believer in justice, completely changes the atmosphere in the room. The gazes of the few remaining onlookers shift from the condemned Sonia to the accuser, Luzhin. Luzhin is caught. His brilliant, meticulously planned scheme has backfired in the most spectacular and public way imaginable. His face turns from smug triumph to a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He sputters, he denies, he tries to discredit his roommate, calling him a foolish, drunken liar, a purveyor of nonsensical, progressive garbage, but his denials are too loud, his rage too transparent, his guilt is written all over his face. His carefully constructed facade of respectability has crumbled, revealing the petty, malicious, and deeply insecure man beneath. He has been exposed. not by a brilliant detective, but by the simple, honest testimony of a man he considered an utter fool. It is at this moment that Raskolnikov, who has been a silent, calculating observer throughout the entire drama, finally speaks. He does not shout. He does not accuse. He simply explains. With the cold, detached precision of a surgeon dissecting a specimen, he lays out Luzhin's entire motive for the room to hear. He explains that Luzhin needed revenge, that he needed to create an irreparable rift between Raskolnikov and his family in order to regain his power over Dunya, and by publicly shaming Sonia, a girl Raskolnikov had just championed by giving her his last 20 rubles, he had hoped to prove that Raskolnikov's judgment was flawed, that his associations were sordid, and that he was an unworthy obstacle to a respectable marriage. Raskolnikov's analysis is so sharp, so insightful, so psychologically astute that it leaves the room breathless. It is a final, intellectual nail in Luzhin's coffin. Completely and utterly defeated, his character exposed, his plan in ruins, Luzhin flees the room, his departure a pathetic, undignified scramble. The immediate threat is gone, but the emotional carnage remains. Katerina Ivanovna, her faith in Sonia now fiercely restored, flies into a new kind of mania, a triumphant, hysterical rage directed at the departed Luzhin and her landlady. Her mind finally snaps, and in a fit of wild, delusional energy, she grabs her terrified children and runs out into the street, determined to go from house to house, playing a barrel organ and forcing her children to dance, to beg for money and prove to the world that the children of a noble family are not to be trifled with. It is her final, tragic, and utterly insane act of defiance. Raskolnikov is left standing in the empty, wrecked room with Sonia, who is still weeping, not from the accusation, but from the shock and the sheer, overwhelming horror of it all. He has won, he has destroyed his rival and saved the innocent, but the victory feels hollow, deeply unsettling. For in order to explain Luzhin's crime, he had to demonstrate a profound and terrifyingly intimate understanding of a criminal's mind, a mind that thinks in terms of power, revenge, and the calculated manipulation of others. He has proven that he is not like Luzhin, but in doing so, he has also revealed just how much he truly has in common with him. The line between the hero and the monster, between the theorist and the scoundrel, has become perilously, almost invisibly thin. The chaotic implosion of the funeral dinner leaves a vacuum in its wake, a void filled with the echoes of Katerina Ivanovna's mad grief. As she disappears into the streets with her children, a tragic spectacle for the indifferent city, Raskolnikov is left standing amidst the wreckage, a silent observer of a ruin he feels partially responsible for. He sees Sonia, her face a pale mask of shock and sorrow, preparing to follow her stepmother, and in that moment a powerful, irresistible, and unspoken command rises from the depths of his soul. He knows, with an instinct that bypasses all reason, that he must follow her, that his own tormented journey has led him inexorably to her door. He leaves the chaos of the Marmaladov's room and follows her through the darkening streets to her own desolate lodgings at the tailor Kapernamov. He enters her large, bare, irregularly shaped room, and the silence is a stark contrast to the hysteria of the funeral dinner. The single, flickering candle casts long, dancing shadows on the walls, making the empty space feel both vast and intensely intimate. Sonia stands before him, trembling, still reeling from the trauma of Luzhin's accusation and the horror of her stepmother's public breakdown. She is afraid of him, this strange, intense, and brilliant man who seems to be a harbinger of both salvation and damnation. She looks at him with the wide, terrified eyes of a cornered animal, yet she does not ask him to leave. She senses, with a deep intuitive pity, that his suffering is somehow even greater than her own, and so she waits. A silent, humble confessor awaiting a terrible and unknown sin. Raskolnikov doesn't confess immediately. He circles the truth like a predator. His first impulse is not to seek forgiveness, but to test her, to wound her, to see if he can drag her down into his own nihilistic abyss. He begins with a kind of intellectual cruelty, forcing her to confront the brutal, logical endpoint of her family's suffering. He asks her what she would choose if the decision were in her hands, if Luzhin and his progressive ideas should be allowed to live and continue causing harm, or if Katerina Ivanovna, in her madness, should be allowed to continue her slow, painful march towards the grave. He is presenting her with his own utilitarian calculus, The very same logic that led him to the pawnbroker's door. He is trying to force her to become a judge, to admit that some lives are worth less than others, to become an accomplice to his own philosophy. But Sonia refuses to enter his intellectual maze. She recoils from his question with a look of pure, uncomprehending pain. Her response is not a logical argument, but a cry from the heart. "But I cannot be a judge of God's providence," she whispers, her voice trembling, "and who has made me a judge to decide who is to live and who is not to live?" It is a simple, absolute rejection of his entire worldview. She operates not from a position of intellectual pride, but from a place of profound, almost childlike humility before the mysteries of life and death. Her refusal to play his game, her simple appeal to a higher authority, is a more powerful refutation of his theory than any logical argument could ever be. It renders his entire intellectual fortress meaningless. Her simple faith seems to break something in him. His cruelty collapses, leaving behind only the raw, desperate, and deeply lonely man beneath. He looks at her, his face contorted with a suffering so immense it seems to physically pain him. He tells her that he has come to her because she is the only person left for him in the entire world. He tells her he has broken with his mother and sister, that he is utterly and completely alone. He makes her see the terrible parallel he has constructed in his mind, that they are both outcasts, both transgressors, who have stepped outside the bounds of ordinary human society. He sees her sacrifice, the selling of her own body, as a sin equal to his own. "We are accursed together," he says, his voice a low, intense whisper, "so let us go together." He has laid the groundwork. He has established their shared damnation, and now, with his heart pounding so hard he can feel it in his throat, he prepares to unburden his soul. He struggles, the words catching in his throat, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated agony. Sonia watches him, her own fear turning into a deep, almost maternal pity. She senses that he is on the verge of something terrible, and she recoils, whispering, "What is the matter with you?" Rascalnikov stares at her, his eyes burning with a feverish, insane light. And then, finally, he forces the words out, his voice a hoarse, broken whisper. "Read the papers," he says. "I am sure you have read about it, about the pawnbroker, Alyona Ivanovna, and her sister, Lizaveta." He pauses, the silence stretching for an eternity, and then he confesses, "It was." Sonia's reaction is not what he expected. There is no scream, no revulsion, no judgment. Only a vast, silent, and uncomprehending horror. Her face goes completely white. She stares at him as if he has just turned into a monster before her very eyes. She rises from her chair and backs away, her hand raised, as if to ward off a terrible vision. But then, as the full, monstrous weight of his confession settles upon her, her horror transforms into something else entirely, something he could never have predicted. Her face softens, her eyes fill with tears, and a look of immense, overwhelming, and almost unbearable pity washes over her features. She sees not a monster, not a cold-blooded theorist, but the most unhappy, the most tormented, the most utterly miserable man in all the world. In that moment, all her fear, all her shame, all her own suffering is forgotten. Consumed by a wave of pure, selfless compassion for him, she runs to him, throws her arms around his neck, and holds him tight, weeping, not for his victims, not for the horror of his crime, but for him, for the terrible, agonizing weight that he has been carrying alone. It is a moment of absolute, unconditional grace. An act of love so profound it shatters the very foundations of Rascalnikov's proud, isolated world. He has spent his entire life building intellectual walls to keep humanity out, and, in a single, instinctive gesture, this timid, shamed girl has broken through them all. He has come to her expecting to find a fellow sinner, an accomplice in damnation, and instead, he has found a saint. He tries to explain himself, to justify the unjustifiable. He pulls away from her and begins to pace the room, launching into a long, rambling, and deeply contradictory explanation of his motives. He tells her it wasn't for money, that he didn't even know what he did with the pathetic trinkets he stole. He tries to explain his theory that he wanted to become a Napoleon, to prove to himself that he was not a louse, but an extraordinary man with the right to transgress. But even as he speaks the words, they sound hollow, pathetic, a childish excuse for a senseless act of brutality. His grand philosophy collapses under the weight of his own confession. He admits that he didn't even have the courage to see it through, that he failed the test, that in trying to prove he wasn't allowed, he became something infinitely worse. He confesses that it was the devil that dragged him there, that he did it in a fit of madness, a dark impulse that he can no longer explain even to himself. His great intellectual justification, the pillar upon which he built his entire identity, has crumbled into dust, leaving only the raw, ugly, and undeniable fact of what he did. He is no longer a theorist. He is just a man, a miserable and guilty man, who has destroyed 2 lives and in the process has utterly and completely destroyed his own. He has finally spoken the truth. And in the light of Sonia's boundless compassion, he is forced, for the first time, to see that truth in all its naked and unforgivable horror. The confession hangs in the air of Sonia's bare room, a monstrous and undeniable truth that has shattered the silence and left both speaker and listener utterly transformed. Rascalnikov is empty. His great intellectual edifice has crumbled into dust. Leaving only the raw, aching shame of his transgression, he has finally spoken the unspeakable, and in doing so has handed the entirety of his being, his freedom and his damnation, over to this timid, terrified girl. He watches her, expecting to see horror, disgust, or a final damning judgment in her eyes. But he sees none of it. He sees only a pity so vast, so profound, that it seems to physically absorb his own suffering. In the face of her boundless compassion, his own immense pride has no defense. It simply dissolves. Sonia, for her part, is no longer the shrinking, shame-filled creature he first met. His confession, his immense and terrible unhappiness, has awakened a powerful, formidable strength within her. Her compassion is not a passive sentiment, it is an active, commanding force. She weeps not from fear, but from a shared sense of agony, and through her tears she sees with an absolute and unwavering clarity what must be done. Her prescription for him is not one of logic or law. It is a path forged in the crucible of her own deep, simple, and profoundly Russian Orthodox faith, a path not of evasion, but of acceptance, a path of suffering. What is to be done? He asks her, his voice a hoarse whisper, the voice of a man who has lost his way and is for the first time asking for directions. Sonia's answer is immediate and absolute. Go at once, this very minute, she commands, her voice gaining a strange prophetic power. Stand at the crossroads, bow down. First kiss the earth which you have defiled, and then bow down to all the world, and say to all men aloud, I am a great sinner, and then God will send you life again. It is a command so alien to Rascalnikov's entire being that he can barely comprehend it. Rodion Romanovich Rascalnikov, the proud theorist, the extraordinary man, is to perform an act of grotesque, medieval, public humiliation. He recoils from her words, his pride flaring up one last time. You mean Siberia? He sneers. You want me to go to prison? But he misunderstands. Sonia is not talking about legal punishment. She is talking about spiritual redemption. The legal consequences are secondary to the cleansing of the soul. He argues with her. He mocks her, calling her a holy fool, a fanatic. But his insults lack their former conviction. His intellectual arguments are like paper swords against the granite certainty of her faith. He cannot grasp her world, a world where suffering is not something to be avoided, but something to be accepted, embraced, as a path to grace. A world where a public act of shame can be a private act of profound and liberating healing. Seeing that he is not yet ready, that his pride is still too strong, she makes a new, more intimate gesture. She tells him that she will follow him to Siberia if he is sent there, that she will not abandon him, and then, from a small chest of drawers, she takes 2 small crosses. One is a simple cypress wood cross. The other is a small copper one that hangs on a string with a religious icon. It is this copper cross that she puts around her own neck, a sign of her own faith and her own accepted burden. The other, the cypress one, she holds out to him, her hand trembling. It is Lizaveta's, she says softly. The words are a quiet thunderclap in the room. The cross belonged to the gentle, innocent peddler, the second, accidental victim of his crime, the very woman who had given Sonia the New Testament from which she had just read the story of Lazarus. The threads of fate, of sin, and of potential redemption are all woven together in this one simple, wooden object. By offering it to him, Sonia is doing something profound. She is not just giving him a religious icon, she is inviting him to literally take up the burden of his innocent victim, to carry the weight of the life he took as a constant physical reminder of his sin. It is an act of penance so direct, so personal, that it transcends any legal punishment. Rascalnikov hesitates. He is not ready. He cannot yet accept it. "Not now, Sonia," he says. It is better not to, but she does not press him. She simply understands, and then she makes the promise that will become the anchor of his salvation. She looks at him, her eyes shining with tears and an unshakable resolve, and says, "We will go to suffer together, then we will bear our crosses together." In this single, breathtaking statement, she offers him the ultimate antidote to his entire philosophy. His theory was born of a proud, arrogant isolation, a belief that the extraordinary man stands alone, above humanity. Sonia's faith is born of a humble, profound sense of connection. A belief that no one, not even the greatest sinner, has to suffer alone. She is not just his confessor, she has offered to become his fellow sufferer, his partner in penance. The profound, soul-altering intimacy of this moment, a moment where a new, terrible and yet hopeful path has been laid out before him, is suddenly and violently shattered by a knock at the door. It is Lebeziatnikov, Lushin's former roommate, and his face is a mask of frantic, agitated excitement. He bursts into the room with terrible news. Katerina Ivanovna, he gasps, has gone completely mad. After Lushin's departure, the landlady, Amalia Ivanovna, had her thrown out of the apartment, and now she is out on the streets. Dragging her 3 terrified children with her, she is raving, he says, telling everyone she is a colonel's daughter, and is returning to her hometown to open an institute for the daughters of noblemen. She is trying to force the children to sing and dance for money, all while coughing up blood and beating a small brass basin like a drum. The news is a brutal, chaotic intrusion, a reminder that while they have been wrestling with the fate of a single, guilty soul, the messy, tragic, and unforgiving world outside has continued to spin. The spiritual drama is abruptly put on hold by the urgent, practical demands of human suffering. Rascalnikov and Sonia stare at each other, their private, world-changing conversation shattered. The cross, the symbol of his future suffering, is still in his hand, a heavy, wooden promise of a path not yet taken. But before he can even begin to contemplate his own journey to the crossroads, he is being pulled back into the immediate, public ruin of the Marmaladov family. They rush out of the room, leaving the flickering candle and the open New Testament behind. They run towards the sound of a distant, tragic commotion. Rascalnikov has been given his path to redemption. A path of humility, of penance, of a shared burden, but his very first steps on that path will be a frantic race through the streets of St. Petersburg. Not towards a public confession of his own sin, but towards another soul who is in the midst of her own final, desperate, and public disintegration. Rascalnikov and Sonia rush from the quiet intimacy of her room into the harsh, chaotic reality of the St. Petersburg streets. Drawn by the sounds of a distant, tragic commotion, they find Katerina Ivanovna near a canal, the center of a jeering, mocking, and morbidly curious crowd. The scene is a waking nightmare, a public spectacle of a soul's final, desperate disintegration. Katerina Ivanovna, her face flushed with the bright, deadly crimson of her illness, is dressed in her pathetic, tattered finery, a grotesque caricature of the noble lady she believes herself to be. She is trying to force her 3 terrified children to perform for the crowd, to sing and dance for scraps of money, all while she herself beats frantically on a small brass basin, creating a jarring, tuneless rhythm for their misery. The children are paralyzed with fear and shame. Young Polekcha's face is streaked with tears as her mother tries to force her to sing a French ballad, while the 2 younger ones stand frozen, their eyes wide with a terror they cannot comprehend. Katerina Ivanovna is completely lost in her madness. She is no longer a mother, but a desperate, cruel stage manager. Her voice is a hoarse shriek as she alternates between scolding the children for their lack of talent and delivering grand, delusional speeches to the laughing crowd. She tells them that she is a colonel's daughter, that she is returning to her hometown to establish a prestigious boarding school for the daughters of the nobility, and that they, the common rabble, are witnessing the performance of future aristocrats. It is a spectacle of such profound, almost unbearable pathos. A woman's pride making its last, desperate, and utterly insane stand against the crushing weight of reality. Sonia, her own face a mask of horror and anguish, tries to intervene. She rushes to her stepmother, begging her to stop, to come home. But Katerina Ivanovna, lost in her fantasy, pushes her away, calling her a shameless creature and a disgrace. She is so consumed by her performance that she cannot even recognize the very daughter whose sacrifice has kept them all alive. Rascalnikov watches the scene with a kind of numb, heavy-hearted dread. He sees the inevitable end approaching, the fine, violent snapping of a mind that has been stretched far beyond its breaking point. He tries to help Sonia, to reason with the half-mad woman, but it's no use. She is lost to them. A ship sinking into a sea of her own delusions. The end, when it comes, is swift and brutal. The physical and emotional strain of her performance, the shouting, the weeping, the frantic beating of the basin, all of it proves too much for her ravaged lungs. Her tirade is cut short by a violent, racking fit of coughing. She stumbles, a handkerchief pressed to her lips, and when she pulls it away, it is stained with a bright, shocking crimson. The crowd falls silent, their mockery and laughter instantly replaced by a hushed, morbid pity. She sways on her feet, her eyes wide with a sudden, lucid terror, and then, with a low groan, she collapses onto the sharp, dirty cobblestones of the street. The final curtain has fallen on her tragic performance. She is carried, unconscious, back to Sonia's room, the same room where Rascalnikov had just confessed his own great sin. The crowd, now sobered and compassionate, parts to let them through. Sonia's desolate room is transformed into a death chamber. Katerina Ivanovna is laid on the bed, her breathing shallow, her face a pale, waxy yellow. The priest who had attended to Marmaladov is summoned once again. And as the final solemn rites are administered, a new and unexpected figure appears in the doorway. It is Svidrigalov. He had been in the crowd, a silent, detached observer of the entire tragic spectacle. He enters the room with his usual unnerving calm, his presence a strange, almost surreal intrusion into this scene of profound and intimate grief. He looks at the dying woman, at the terrified orphaned children, and then he does something completely unexpected with a quiet, almost business-like efficiency. He announces that he will take care of everything. He will pay for the funeral, and more than that. He will deposit a significant sum of money, 10,000 rubles, into an account for the 3 children. He will personally arrange for them to be placed in the best orphanages, ensuring their future is secure. It is an act of breathtaking, almost unbelievable charity, but coming from this man, it feels deeply unsettling. It is not an act of compassion, but an act of power, of a man so bored with his own depravity that he has decided to amuse himself by playing the role of a philanthropist. Rascalnikov watches him, unable to comprehend his motives, seeing him as a strange, immoral force of nature, capable of both immense cruelty and inexplicable kindness. Katerina Ivanovna, in her final moments, returns to a state of semi-lucidity. She recognizes Sonia. She sees her children, but she refuses the final consolations of the priest. Her pride defiant to the very end, her mind drifts back to her past, to her noble father, to the balls and dinners of her youth. "The horses are tired," she whispers, her voice a faint, rattling breath. "Let them rest." She tries to sit up, to sing one last, defiant song, but her strength fails her, and with a final, shuddering sigh, she collapses back onto the pillow. Her turbulent, tragic, and deeply unhappy life is finally over. Rascalnikov is left standing in the silent, crowded room, the cypress cross that Sonia had given him clutched in his hand. He has just been a witness, not to a theoretical transgression, but to the slow, grinding, and brutally real destruction of a human life by poverty, by pride, and by despair. The abstract has once again become terrifyingly concrete. Svidrigalov's strange, unsettling act of charity hangs in the air, a question mark that further complicates the moral landscape of his world, and he feels a new, deeper, and more binding connection to Sonia, who is now left alone to care for 3 orphaned children. His one act of giving, the 20 rubles that paid for the funeral dinner, has entangled him in this family's fate, chaining him to the real-world consequences of human suffering in a way his theory never could. The path to the crossroad, the path of his own repentance, now seems more distant than ever, obscured by the immediate, undeniable duty to the living and the dead who have just been left in his care. The days following the funeral of Katerina Ivanovna are a strange gray limbo for Raskolnikov. The chaotic, external dramas have temporarily subsided, leaving him once again alone with the silent, internal drama of his own soul. He feels a profound and weary detachment from the world. The miraculous intervention of Nikolai's false confession has given him a strange kind of freedom. A freedom from immediate suspicion, but it's a hollow and meaningless liberty. It has not freed him from his guilt, it has only deepened his sense of isolation. He has a fine, bitter argument with his family and Razumikhin, pushing them away with a cold, deliberate cruelty. Their love, their concern, their desperate attempts to pull him back into the world of human connection feel like an unbearable weight, an accusation his pride cannot endure, and so he retreats, wandering the streets of St. Petersburg like a ghost. A man who is technically free, but in every way that matters, is already serving a life sentence in the solitary confinement of his own mind. It is into this self-imposed exile that the outside world makes one final, decisive intrusion. He is in his room, sunk in a state of dull, listless apathy. When there is a knock at the door, it is Porfiry Petrovitch. The investigator's appearance is a shock. Raskolnikov was convinced that after Nikolai's confession, their strange and dangerous game was over. But Porfiry's demeanor is completely different from their previous encounters. The playful, mocking, cat-like quality is gone. Replaced by a quiet, serious, and almost sympathetic gravity, he enters the room not as a hunter cornering his prey, but as a doctor visiting a very sick patient. His face is weary, and there is a look of genuine, almost sad concern in his watery eyes. Porfiry begins not with a trick or a question, but with an apology. He expresses his sincere regret for his methods during their last meeting, for the psychological games, for the surprise he had waiting behind the partition. He admits that he acted unfairly, that his desire to psychologically unnerve Raskolnikov was unprofessional. This apology is a masterful, disarming move. It instantly shatters Raskolnikov's carefully prepared defenses. He had been ready for another attack, another duel of wit, but he is completely unprepared for this display of sincerity and respect. He is, for a moment, rendered speechless. A fencer whose opponent has suddenly and unexpectedly laid down his sword. Having cleared the air, Porfiry then proceeds to lay out his entire case, not as an accusation, but as one intellectual explaining a complex problem to another. It is a long, brilliant, and utterly devastating monologue. He explains, step by step, how he came to suspect Raskolnikov from the very beginning. He talks about the article on crime, a purely theoretical piece that nevertheless revealed a dangerous and prideful psychology. He speaks of the fainting spell at the police station, an act of weakness, so profound it could only come from a man whose nerves were already stretched to the breaking point. He mentions the reckless conversation with Zhumyatov, the compulsive need to dance around the truth, and the bizarre self-destructive visit back to the apartment. He lays out all of Raskolnikov's actions, like pieces on a chessboard, showing him how his every move, every attempt to prove his own cleverness, was in fact a step deeper into the trap. He then explains, with a deep and almost sad understanding of human nature, why he is absolutely certain that the painter Nikolai is innocent. He describes the man not as a culprit, but as a member of a religious sect of schismatics, a type of man common in the Russian countryside, a man whose soul is predisposed to a kind of ecstatic suffering. Nikolai, he explains, didn't confess out of guilt for this specific event, but out of a general, free-floating guilt, a spiritual need to take on a cross, to suffer for the sins of others. It is a brilliant piece of psychological and cultural insight, and it demonstrates to Raskolnikov that Porfiry understands the world and the souls of men with a depth that his own arid, intellectual theory could never account for. Porfiry, the man of logic and law, has a more profound understanding of faith and irrationality than he does. Raskolnikov listens to this calm, methodical dissection of his own soul with a kind of numb horror. It is like watching a brilliant surgeon explain, with detached precision, the nature of a fatal disease that is consuming you from the inside. There is no escape. Porfiry has seen everything, understood everything. He has not found a single piece of physical evidence. He has simply looked directly into Raskolnikov's soul and read the truth that was written there. The intellectual pride that had been Raskolnikov's shield and his sword is now utterly useless. He has been completely and irrevocably outmaneuvered by a superior mind. Having laid out his entire airtight psychological case, Porfiry finally drops all pretense. The time for games is over. He looks Raskolnikov directly in the eye, his voice quiet, solemn, and devoid of any malice, and he delivers the final inescapable verdict. "You, Rodion Romanovich, are the one," he says. The words are not an accusation, they are a simple statement of fact. A truth that both men have known all along and have simply been dancing around. The duel is over, and Porfiry has won. But he does not make an arrest. In a final, strange act of professional compassion, he offers Raskolnikov a choice, a way out. He tells him that if he goes to the authorities and confesses now, of his own free will, his sentence will be significantly reduced. He explains that Nikolai's false confession has created a confusing situation that he, Porfiry, can use to his advantage to argue for leniency. He gives him a deadline, a day, perhaps two, to think it over, to make his choice. It's an act of mercy, but it's also the final, most brilliant turn of the screw. Porfiry knows that the uncertainty, the weight of the choice, will be a more effective form of torture than any prison cell. He tells Raskolnikov that this is the only path forward. "Accept your suffering," he advises, his voice now almost fatherly. Suffering is a great thing, it has an idea in it. In this moment, the rational investigator, the man of law, is echoing the very same spiritual prescription that the humble, faithful Sonia had offered. He is telling him that redemption lies not in escaping punishment, but in embracing it. The two great forces in Raskolnikov's life, the law and faith, have converged, and they are both pointing him in the same direction, towards the crossroads, towards a public confession of his sin. As he prepares to leave, Porfiry offers one last chilling piece of advice. He knows the depths of Raskolnikov's despair, the nihilistic void that his failed theory has left behind, and he warns him, gently, that if he is contemplating a more permanent, a more final, escape from his suffering, that he should at least have the decency to leave a short note, explaining where he hid the stolen goods. It is a quiet, devastating acknowledgement of how completely he understands the darkness in Raskolnikov's soul. He knows that the young man is standing on the very edge of the abyss. Porfiry leaves, and Raskolnikov is left alone, completely and utterly defeated. The external battle is over. There are no more games to be played, no more intellectual defenses to be mounted. He is cornered, not by facts or evidence, but by the inescapable truth of his own psychology. He is now faced with a final, stark choice. He can take the dark, empty path that Svidrigalov represents, the path of self-destruction, of a final, nihilistic escape into nothingness. Or he can take the terrifying, humiliating, but strangely hopeful path that Sonia has illuminated, the path of suffering, of repentance, and of a shared cross. A path now ironically endorsed by the very man who has just cornered him. The investigator has left, but the judgment has just begun. Porfiry's departure leaves a profound and unnerving silence in its wake. Raskolnikov is alone, but the room feels crowded with the investigator's final inescapable words. He is no longer a suspect, he is a condemned man, simply awaiting the formality of a sentence. The intellectual game is over, the board has been cleared, and he has been checkmated with a quiet, almost gentle, finality. He is now faced with a stark, simple choice. The path of Sonia, a path of public shame, of suffering and the strange, terrifying promise of a new life. Or the path of the abyss, a final, nihilistic leap into the nothingness that his own theory has created for him. He feels a strange paralysis, a profound weariness of the soul that makes any choice at all feel like an impossible effort. But then, a new and morbid curiosity begins to stir within him, a strange, unhealthy fascination with the abyss itself. Before he chooses his path, he feels an overwhelming, almost chemical, need to understand the alternative. He needs to see the other man who chose transgression, the man who lives on the other side of good and evil. He needs to see Svidrigalov. It's a desperate, almost suicidal impulse, like a man leaning over a cliff, not to jump, but simply to get a better look at the rocks below. He leaves his room and goes in search of the one person in the world who might truly understand him. Not with Sonia's pity, but with the cold, conspiratorial kinship of a fellow monster. he finds him in a grimy, third-rate tavern, a place teeming with the cheap, frantic energy of hired singers and popping champagne corks. Svidrigalov is sitting alone at a table, a picture of profound and utter boredom, trying to distract himself from the great, yawning void of his own soul with the most sordid pleasures the city has to offer. He greets Rascalnikov with a weary, almost relieved smile, as if he's genuinely happy to have found someone interesting to talk to. He is, as always, impeccably dressed, a strange island of dapper respectability in a sea of drunken squalor, and he immediately begins to talk, his voice a low, confidential murmur, as if they are old friends sharing the darkest of secrets. What follows is not a conversation, but a monologue, a tour of a soul that has become a wasteland. Svidrigalov speaks of women, of his past affairs, of his upcoming marriage to a 16-year-old girl whose parents are eagerly selling her to him for a comfortable future. He speaks of it all with a chilling, unapologetic frankness, a complete absence of any moral compass. Women, for him, are not people, they are objects. Distractions, fleeting sensations in his endless war against boredom. He recounts dark, ambiguous stories from his past, hinting at the ruin of a deaf-mute girl, the suspicious passing of a servant. He speaks of these terrible events with the same detached, weary amusement with which he had described the visitations of his wife's ghost. He is a man for whom all experiences, from the supernatural to the depraved, have been flattened into a single, monotonous landscape of jaded indifference. Rascalnikov listens, silent and captivated. He is both repulsed and hypnotized. He came here seeking an answer, and he is getting one. Though it's not the one he expected, he is looking at the logical endpoint of his own philosophy. Svidrigalov is the extraordinary man made flesh. He has transgressed. He has stepped over every conceivable moral line, and he has not been struck down by lightning. He has not been tormented by guilt. He has simply been afflicted with a terminal case of cosmic boredom. This Rascalnikov realizes with a dawning horror is the true punishment for a crime without remorse, not a prison cell, not a guilty conscience, but an eternity in a grimy tavern, trying to feel something, anything, in a world that has been stripped of all meaning. The conversation inevitably turns to the one subject that connects them. Dunya, Svidrigalov, admits that he still desires her, that she is the only woman who has ever truly captivated him. And he reveals that he still intends to see her. He knows about her break with Luzhin, and he sees an opportunity. He tells Rascalnikov that he is planning to leave the city soon, to go on a journey, a clear and chilling euphemism for his own final act. And before he goes, he wants to see Dunya one last time. He needs Rascalnikov's help to arrange it, or at the very least, his promise not to interfere. It is a request that is both a plea and a threat, a final, desperate grasp at the one thing in the world he still seems to want. And then, as Rascalnikov is about to refuse, Svidrigalov plays his final devastating card. He leans in, a triumphant, almost gleeful smile on his face, and reveals a shocking secret. He tells Rascalnikov that after their first meeting, he was so intrigued by him that he made some inquiries, and in a stroke of what he calls fateful coincidence, he discovered that his own new neighbor in the apartment next to his was none other than Sofia Semyonovna Marmaladova, Sonia. He explains that their rooms are separated by a thin, flimsy wall, and that he has a habit of listening to his neighbors. It's another of his little distractions, another way to pass the empty hours. He lets the implication hang in the air for a moment before delivering the final killing blow. He tells Rascalnikov, with that same chilling conspiratorial smile, that he was in his room listening. During Rascalnikov's entire last visit to Sonia, he heard everything, every word of the desperate, soul-shattering confession. He knows who brought an end to the old pawnbroker. He knows about Lizaveta. He knows it all. In that single horrifying instant, the entire dynamic between them is irrevocably changed. Rascalnikov is no longer a curious observer. He is a hostage. His freedom, his future, his very life, is now completely and utterly in the hands of this depraved, unpredictable, and deeply dangerous man. The intellectual duel with Porfiry, which had seemed like the ultimate battle, now feels like a childish game in comparison. Porfiry was a man of logic, of rules, of a recognizable system. Svidrigalov is a creature of pure chaotic impulse, a man who operates without any rules at all. His knowledge of the secret is not a tool for justice, it is a weapon of personal leverage, a key that can unlock the one thing he wants. A final meeting with Dunya. Rascalnikov is completely and totally trapped. His secret is now shared, not by a saint who wants to save his soul, but by a monster who wants to use it to possess his sister. Svidrigalov leaves the tavern. Having laid his trap with a casual, almost lazy precision, he is no longer just a dark philosophical mirror for Rascalnikov. He is now an active and terrifying threat. A blackmailer who holds the power of life and death in his hands. Rascalnikov is left alone at the table. The sound of the cheap singers and the popping corks now a mocking, hellish chorus. He has looked into the abyss, and the abyss has not only looked back, it has smiled, and it has told him that it knows his name. With the knowledge of Rascalnikov's confession now secured like a jewel in his pocket, Svidrigalov wastes no time. He knows that this secret is the key, the one instrument powerful enough to unlock the only thing in his empty world that he still desires, a definitive confrontation with Avdotya Romanovna. Dunya. He orchestrates the meeting with a cold, practiced precision, sending her a note that is a masterpiece of subtle blackmail. He speaks of her brother's dire situation, hinting at a terrible secret and a path to ruin that only he, Svidrigalov, can prevent. He preys on her deepest fear and her fiercest love, her protective instinct for her brother, and he knows she will not be able to resist. Dunya, terrified for Rascalnikov, but also deeply suspicious of her former tormentor, agrees to meet. But she makes one condition: she will only meet him in his rooms. Because she believes, spatingly, that Sonia will be nearby, a silent chaperone to ensure her safety. It is a fatal miscalculation, a small error in judgment that will lead her directly into the heart of the trap. She arrives at his lodgings, her face a pale, determined mask of composure, but her heart is pounding with a dread she refuses to show. Svidrigalov greets her with his usual unnerving politeness, his manners impeccable, his smile a placid, unreadable veil. He leads her into his rented rooms, which are surprisingly pleasant, and as she steps inside, she hears the decisive, metallic click of a key turning in the lock behind her. In that single, chilling sound, she understands the full extent of her error. She is trapped, alone, and completely at the mercy of the man she fears and despises more than any other being on earth. Her composure shatters, replaced by a wave of pure, cold terror. "You have locked the door," she whispers, her voice trembling, and Svidrigalov simply nods, his calm, pleasant expression unchanged. He does not lunge. He does not threaten. His method is far more insidious. He begins to speak, his voice calm and reasonable, and he proceeds to dismantle her world, piece by piece. He tells her, with a tone of someone sharing a regrettable but necessary piece of information, that her brother, Rodion Romanovich, has a great deal of trouble ahead of him. He explains that her brother is responsible for the final acts committed against the old pawnbroker and her sister Lizaveta. He proves it by recounting, with chilling accuracy, specific details from the confession he had overheard through the thin wall of Sonia's room. Every word is a hammer blow, shattering Dunya's defenses. She listens, her face white with a horror that transcends her own immediate danger. Her brother, her proud, brilliant Rodia, is not just sick, he is a transgressor of the worst kind. Having delivered this devastating blow, Svidrigalov then presents himself as the savior. He tells her that he, and only he, holds the key to her brother's salvation. He can provide the money, the means, the connections to get Rascalnikov out of Russia. To a new life in America, he can erase the crime, silence the witnesses, and save the entire family from public ruin and disgrace. He holds out this promise of salvation like a golden apple, a perfect, irresistible solution to an impossible problem. And then, with the same calm, reasonable voice, he names his price. The price, of course, is her. He speaks of his obsession with her, of his belief that she is the only woman on earth who can redeem him from his own profound emptiness. He asks her to sacrifice herself, to become his companion in order to save her beloved brother. It is the ultimate monstrous temptation, a dark echo of her earlier engagement to Luzhin. But this time, the stakes are not just her happiness, but her brother's very life. But Dunya is not a helpless victim. She is a Rascalnikov, and beneath her terror lies a core of unbreakable, defiant pride. After the initial, paralyzing shock of her brother's guilt, a new and powerful resolve hardens within her. She looks at Svidrigalov, and she sees not a savior, but a jailer, a man using her brother's soul as a bargaining chip, and she makes her choice. She refuses him utterly, and as he takes a step towards her, his calm facade finally beginning to crack. She reaches into her coat and pulls out a small revolver, a weapon Marfa Petrovna had given her long ago, weapon she had brought with her, just in case. The power dynamic in the room instantly shifts. The trapped has become the threat. "Unlock the door at once," she commands, her voice steady despite the terror that is coursing through her veins. Svidrigalov stares at the revolver, and a strange, ecstatic smile spreads across his face. He is a man so profoundly bored with life, so deadened by his own depravities, that this moment of real, mortal danger is a thrilling, intoxicating sensation. It is the most alive he has felt in years. He dares her. He takes another step, convinced that she, this virtuous, noble creature, does not have it in her to pull the trigger. But he is wrong. A flash, a deafening report, and a bullet grazes his temple. The smell of gunpowder filling the air. He stands his ground, his face pale, the strange, ecstatic smile still on his lips. She raises the gun again, her hand trembling, and pulls the trigger, but this time it misfires with a dull click. She tries one last time, her will locked in a terrible battle with her own conscience, and then, with a cry of despair, she gives up. She cannot do it. She cannot take a human life, even his, and she flings the revolver to the floor. The final act of the drama has arrived. She is now completely and utterly defenseless. The weapon lies between them on the floor. He has won. He has broken her will, and she is his for the taking. He slowly walks towards her, his face a mask of strange, unreadable emotion. She is his property now, by every law of his own immoral universe. But as he looks at her face, which is not contorted with fear, but with a pure, undiluted, and unconquerable hatred for him, he sees the truth. He can possess her body, but he can never ever touch her soul. He can never earn anything from her, but her absolute and eternal contempt, the one thing he truly wanted from her. A genuine connection, a flicker of feeling that might save him from his own emptiness, is utterly and forever impossible. And in that moment, something inside Svidrigalov breaks, or perhaps, for the first time in his life, something whole and human awakens. He has looked into the face of a goodness so absolute, it is immune to his corruption, and his own depravity recoils from it. He stands for a long, silent moment, his face working with a strange, painful emotion, and then, with a twisted, sorrowful smile, he bends down, not to pick up the gun but to take the key from his pocket. He walks to the door, unlocks it, and opens it wide. "Take it, and go quickly," he says, his voice a hoarse whisper. He lets her go. It is the first, last, and only truly selfless act of his entire life, and in that single act of release, he has passed his own final judgment upon himself. He has confronted the absolute impossibility of his own redemption. Dunya flees without a word, without a backward glance, leaving Svidrigalov standing alone in the silent room, the revolver still lying on the floor, a small metallic symbol of his ultimate failure. His final desperate gamble for a reason to live has been lost. The one person he believed could save him has shown him that he is, and always will be, utterly and completely alone. The journey he had spoken of to Rascalnikov is now the only destination left. He has willingly stepped off the edge of the abyss, and there is nothing below him but a long and final fall. The departure of Dunya is the final closing of the final door in Svidrigalov's soul. He stands alone in the room, the scent of gunpowder still hanging in the air, a faint acrid reminder of his ultimate failure. He has played his last card and lost, not because he was outmaneuvered, but because he was confronted with a goodness so absolute that his own corruption had no power over it. In his one and only act of grace, the act of letting her go, he has passed a final irrevocable sentence upon himself. He has looked into the abyss, and for the first time has not been amused by what he saw. There is nothing left for him here, no more sensations to chase, no more souls to test, no more distractions to keep the great yawning void of his own being at bay. He leaves his rooms and steps out into a city that seems to mirror the chaos in his own soul, A tremendous storm has broken over St. Petersburg. The sky is a bruised, violent purple, rent by flashes of lightning. The wind howls through the narrow streets, and a torrential, almost tropical rain lashes the cobblestones. Svidrigalov walks through it all, not seeking shelter but embracing the tempest, letting the cold rain soak his fine clothes. It is as if the external storm is a comforting reflection of his own internal ruin. He is a man methodically settling his accounts before embarking on a long and final journey. He goes first to Sonia's building, and finding her out, leaves a note for her with a servant, along with 3,000 rubles, a strange final act of immoral charity for the girl whose faith he could never comprehend. Then he goes to the family of his 16-year-old fiancée, and with the same calm, detached air, he leaves them a note containing a promissory note for 15,000 rubles. A massive dowry that will ensure the child bride he will never marry has a comfortable future. His affairs are now in order. He spends the rest of the evening drifting from one sordid, low-life tavern to another, seeking oblivion in noise and cheap champagne, but finding none. Finally, in the dead of night, he finds a hotel, a miserable, dilapidated wooden building in a forgotten corner of the city. The room he is given is a perfect physical manifestation of his own soul. It is tiny, cramped, and filthy, with dusty yellow wallpaper peeling from the walls and a feeling of profound, ancient decay. The air is thick with the smell of mice and something vaguely sweet, like rot. Svidrigalov looks around the squalid little room, and a strange, cold smile touches his lips. This, he thinks, is it. This is the grimy bathhouse, full of spiders. He has found his eternity, and it is every bit as pathetic and sordid as he had always imagined. He lies down on the narrow, dirty bed, but sleep will not come. His body is feverish, his mind a relentless procession of fragmented memories and strange, disconnected thoughts. He is not haunted by guilt. He feels no remorse. What haunts him is a profound, almost physical disgust with the sheer, unadulterated filth of existence. He thinks of the storm outside, of the cold, black water of the Neva, and then a mouse, a small, pathetic creature, scurries across his bed, filling him with a wave of inexplicable loathing. It is the final trivial detail in a life full of grand depravities, and it disgusts him more than any of them. He drifts into a feverish, nightmarish sleep, and his soul, now completely untethered from the world, begins its final, terrifying descent. He dreams he is in a beautiful, light-filled room, surrounded by fragrant flowers. In the center of the room is a coffin, and inside lies a young girl, no more than 14, who has taken her own life by throwing herself into the river. Her face is serene, but her body is broken. She is a victim, a sacrifice, a quiet accusation from the ghosts of his own past. The dream then shifts, and he is back in the real, waking world, or so he thinks. He feels a chill in the room, and sees a small child, a girl of no more than 5, hiding in the corner, weeping. She is lost. Her clothes are soaking wet. She is shivering violently, and Svidrigalov, in a final flickering echo of some long-forgotten human instinct, feels a pang of what he thinks is pity. He gently picks the child up, carries her to his bed, and tucks her in. Trying to warm her, he soothes her, telling her he will get her some tea. He feels a strange, almost paternal tenderness, a final, fleeting glimpse of the man he might have been, but as he looks down at her small, innocent face, a horrifying transformation begins. The child's features start to shift, her innocent, tear-stained expression melts away, and in its place is the leering, shameless, and deeply predatory face of a seasoned harlot. Her eyes, which a moment ago were blue and full of childish tears, are now black and soulless, and they wink at him, a look of pure, depraved, and knowing invitation. It is the ultimate horror, the final absolute damnation of his soul. His own corruption is so complete that it has infected the very image of innocence itself. He cannot escape it. Even in what begins as an act of pity, his own depravity is reflected back at him, a monstrous, leering gargoyle. He awakens with a cry of pure terror, not from a dream, but into a nightmare. He flees the room, leaving the phantom child behind, and runs out into the cold, damp, and desolate streets of the pre-dawn city. The storm has passed, leaving behind a thick, gray fog that clings to the buildings like a shroud. He walks until he finds himself near a large administrative building with a watchtower. A single soldier stands guard, a solitary witness in the sleeping city. Svidrigalov approaches him, his steps steady, his face now a mask of calm, almost cheerful, resolve. This is not a good place, the soldier tells him. Svidrigalov smiles his strange, cold smile. No matter, my brother, he says. I am going to America. He pulls the revolver, the same one Dunya had thrown to the floor, from his pocket. The soldier stares at him, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. Here, you cannot do that here, he stammers, his voice a panicked whisper. This is not the place. Svidrigalov does not reply. He simply raises the revolver to his right temple, his face serene, his choice absolute. He has looked into the grimy bathhouse of eternity and has decided, with a final weary shrug, to check in early. He has found the one final sensation that life has left to offer him, the one act that he has not yet performed, the ultimate escape from the prison of his own unending boredom. The news of Svidrigalov's final act reaches Rascalnikov, not as a shock, but as a quiet, logical conclusion. It is the final piece of a grim puzzle falling into place. The path of the man who lives without consequence, the path of the extraordinary being who feels no remorse, has led to a squalid hotel room and a final empty report in the damp morning air. Svidrigalov, in his ultimate escape, has done Rascalnikov one last terrible favor. He has shown him the true face of the abyss, and in doing so has slammed that door shut forever. There is now only one path left, the other path, the one illuminated by the flickering candlelight in Sonia's room, the path of suffering, of humility, and of confession. The decision has been made, not in a flash of insight, but in a slow, weary settling of his soul, and with this decision comes a new and final duty, the duty to say goodbye. He first goes to the modest lodgings where his mother and sister are staying. He finds his mother, Pulcheria Alexandrovna. Alone she is frail, anxious, her love for him a raw, exposed nerve. She knows, with a mother's intuition that transcends all logic, that something is terribly, irrevocably wrong. But she clings to a desperate, manufactured hope. Rascalnikov, for his part, puts on a performance, a final, heartbreaking act of love for the woman who gave him life. He tries to be cheerful, to be the loving, brilliant son she remembers. He speaks of the future, of going away to start a new life, of how he will soon be a great lawyer and will make her proud. Every word is a carefully constructed lie, a gentle fiction designed to shield her from a truth he knows would destroy her. She listens, her eyes searching his face, wanting so desperately to believe him, but sensing the deep, cold current of finality beneath his warm words, she bombards him with anxious, fluttering questions about his health, his plans, his articles. Her hope is a form of denial, a frantic attempt to rebuild the image of the son she is apt to lose. It is a conversation of ghosts, a dialogue where everything that matters remains unspoken, a profound and agonizing dance around a terrible silent truth. Then Rascalnikov delivers the true purpose of his visit, a confession wrapped in a declaration of love. He tells her that no matter what happens, no matter where he goes or what she might hear about him in the future, she must always remember one thing, that he has always loved her, that his heart has always been with her, even in his darkest moments. It is his last will and testament, the only real truth he can give her. He kneels before her, and she throws her arms around him, clinging to him with a desperate, convulsive strength, as if trying to physically hold him back from the dark, unknown journey he is about to take. They say no more. There is nothing left to say. It is a silent, tragic farewell between a mother and a son who will never truly see each other again. He leaves her and walks back to his own room, knowing that his sister will be waiting for him. And she is? Dunya stands in the middle of his squalid coffin, her face pale but her expression firm, resolute. The contrast between this meeting and the one with his mother is stark and absolute. With his mother, everything was a performance, a gentle illusion. With Dunya, there is only the raw, unvarnished, and incredibly painful truth. She knows, she doesn't know how. Perhaps from Svidrigalov's dark hints, perhaps from her own sharp intuition, but she knows the essential fact of what he has done. There are no questions, no accusations, only a deep, shared, and sorrowful understanding. He tells her that he is on his way to confess, to give himself up. He tries, one last time, to explain himself, to frame his decision in the language of his old, proud theory. He tells her he is going not because he is remorseful, but because he is weak, because he is a vile louse who couldn't bear the weight of his own transgression. He is still, even now, clinging to the last pathetic remnants of his pride, trying to cast his surrender as a failure of nerve rather than a moral imperative. Dunya lists, her heart breaking not just for his crime, but for the terrible, intellectual pride that has so thoroughly poisoned his soul. She weeps. But her love for him is a fierce, unwavering flame. She does not judge him. She does not condemn him. She accepts him. She tells him that his decision to confess, to accept the punishment, is the right one, that it is the only way to expiate his sin. She, like Sonia, and even like Porfiry, understands that his only path forward is through suffering. She has brought him his last meal, and as he eats, they speak of the future, a future in which he will be gone, a prisoner in the frozen wastes of Siberia. But their bond, their love, remains an unbreakable thread connecting them across any distance. It is a goodbye between equals, between two proud, intelligent souls who see the situation in all its tragic clarity. As he prepares to leave his room for the last time, he remembers the small, cypress wood cross that Sonia had given him, the cross that had belonged to the innocent Lizaveta. He had not yet put it on, the symbol of the suffering he had intellectually accepted, but had not yet spiritually embraced. Dunya sees it in his hand, and she understands. She places her own small icon on his chest. A final sisterly blessing. Their final embrace is not the desperate, clinging hug of his mother. It is a firm, quiet acknowledgement of their shared sorrow and their enduring love. It is a farewell that is both an ending and a beginning, the end of his life as he knew it, and the beginning of his long, painful journey towards a new one. He walks out of his room, closing the door on the yellowed walls, the miserable sofa, the entire physical manifestation of his theoretical life. He has now settled his accounts with the people he loves. He has severed the last ties that bind him to his old existence. He is now completely and utterly alone, a man walking towards his own judgment, stripped of everything but the terrible weight of his own actions, and the small wooden cross clutched in his hand. There is only one stop left for him to make, one more person he must see before he can finally face the law. His next steps, and his last steps as a free man, will take him back to Sonia's room, back to the one person who can give him the strength to do what must be done. Having severed the final painful ties to his family and his former life, Rascalnikov is now a man adrift, a ghost haunting the city that has been the stage for his great and terrible drama. There is only one anchor left for him in this world, one final piece of business to attend to before the end. He makes his way back through the darkening streets to Sonia's room, his steps heavy but resolute. He finds her waiting for him, her face pale and anxious, as if she has been holding her breath since he left. She knows why he has returned. She sees the final, irrevocable decision in his eye. He does not need to speak. He has come for the cross. He tells her it's time, and with a solemn, almost ritualistic gravity, Sonia takes the small cypress wood cross from her drawer, the cross that had belonged to the innocent Lizaveta. She makes the sign of the cross over him, then over herself, and places the string around his neck. It is a moment of profound, silent sacrament in accepting this simple, wooden object. Rascalnikov is doing more than just appeasing Sonia. He is, for the first time, consciously and physically accepting his burden. He is taking up the weight of his transgression, not as a theoretical problem, but as a spiritual reality. The cross is a tangible link to his victim, a constant, physical reminder of the life he took, and in wearing it, he is finally, truly, beginning his penance. Sonia weeps, but her tears are not of sorrow, but of a strange, painful, and sacred sense of purpose. Their two souls are now bound together, not by damnation, but by a shared and terrible journey towards grace. He leaves her room and begins his final walk as a free man. His destination is the Haymarket, the place Sonia had designated as the crossroads, a chaotic, teeming hub of commerce and common life, the very heart of the ordinary, teeming humanity he had once held in such profound contempt. As he walks, his pride, his intellect, his arrogant theory, all of it rises up for one last desperate rebellion. His mind screams at him, calling him a coward, a fool. What is the point of this absurd theatrical gesture, this medieval self-abasement? Why should he, a man who dared to think a new thought, humiliate himself before the very lice he had deemed himself superior to? The thought of kneeling in the mud, of being laughed at by the drunken rabble, is a violation so profound it almost makes him turn back. His entire being recoils from the sheer unadulterated shame of it. But then he remembers Sonia. He remembers the unwavering certainty in her eyes, the quiet strength of her faith, her promise to bear the cross with him. Her presence is a palpable force, a spiritual hand on his back, pushing him forward. He understands, in a way that transcends logic, that this act is not for the crowd, it is not for the law, it is for himself. It is the necessary, ritualistic act of killing his own pride, the very pride that had led him to his ruin. He arrives at the Haymarket. The square is a swirling vortex of sound and motion, crowded with peasants, merchants, and drunks. He stands at the center of it all, a silent, solitary figure, his heart pounding, his body trembling, and then, with a final shuddering surrender of his will, he falls to his knees. He kneels in the dirt and the filth of the public square, and he bows down, pressing his lips to the cold, grimy cobblestones. He kisses the earth that he has defiled, the earth that has drunk the life force of his victims. And in that single, profound act of humility, he feels a strange, ecstatic sense of release. It is as if, in lowering himself to the ground, he has finally reconnected with the humanity he had tried to sever himself from. The crowd, of course, does not understand. A wave of mockery and laughter ripples through the square. "Look at the gentleman, he's drunk," someone shouts. "He's bowing down to the whole world in St. Petersburg." Another jeers. Their scorn washes over him, but it no longer has the power to wound him. Their judgment is meaningless. He has already accepted a far greater one. He tries to say the words Sonia had commanded him to say, to proclaim aloud, "I am a great sinner," but the words stick in his throat. The final act of public verbal confession is still beyond him. His pride, though broken, is not yet completely vanquished, but the gesture, the kneeling, the kissing of the earth, is enough. It is the beginning. He looks up, his eyes scanning the crowd, and he sees her. Sonia is standing at a distance, her face pale, her body trembling, watching him. She has kept her promise. She has followed him. She is bearing witness to his first organizing step on the path of repentance. The sight of her unwavering, compassionate presence, gives him the final surge of strength he needs. He gets to his feet, brushes the dirt from his knees, and turns his steps towards the police station. He walks into the familiar, grimy building, a place that has haunted his fever dreams, and ascends the stairs to the administrative office. His journey is coming full circle. He is returning to the very place where his unraveling began, where his body first betrayed him with a As he enters the office, he sees the assistant superintendent, the fiery Ilya Petrovich, the powder keg, sitting at his desk. But even now, at the very threshold of his confession, his pride makes one last, desperate stand. He learns from an officer that the news of Svidrigalov's final act has just reached them. The shock of it, the final sordid end of his dark mirror, momentarily throws him off balance. He turns, without a word, and walks back out of the office, back into the courtyard. Is there still another way? His mind whispers, another escape. He stands in the courtyard, the cool air on his face, his will wavering for one last terrible moment, and then he sees her. Sonia has followed him here as well. She stands near the entrance, her face a mask of such profound, unbearable anguish, such utter despair at the thought that he might fail now, at the very last second, that it strikes him with the force of a physical blow. The sight of her suffering face is the final, decisive event that kills his pride forever. He cannot fail her. He cannot let her sacrifice, her faith, her love, be for nothing. His own fate is no longer the most important thing in the world. Her faith in him is. He turns around, his face set in a mask of grim, pale resolve, and walks back into the police station. He goes directly to Ilya Petrovich, who looks up at him with annoyance, and with a quiet, trembling voice that is barely audible, he confesses, "It was I," his looking past the officer, as if into a great, empty distance. "It was I who ended the lives of the old pawnbroker and her sister Lizaveta with an instrument." Ilya Petrovich's jaw drops, the office falls silent, the clerks freeze, their pens hovering over their papers, the long, torturous, and solitary journey of Rodion Romanovich. Rascalnikov is finally over. He has surrendered, he has confessed, he has accepted his cross, and in the profound echoing silence of the police station, his new life, the long, uncertain, and deeply painful journey of a repentant sinner, is just about to begin. The Confession of Rodion Romanovich Raskolnikov brings the central feverish drama of our story to a close. The long, torturous, internal journey from a monstrous theory to a broken surrender is over, and what follows is the cold, methodical, and almost detached process of the world rendering its judgment. The legal aftermath of the case is, in many ways, as strange and unexpected as the events that preceded it. Raskolnikov receives a surprisingly lenient sentence for his transgression, due to a confluence of factors that seem to rise up in his defense: his own full and frank confession, his refusal to defend himself or mitigate his guilt, and the prior, confusing confession of the painter Nikolai, all served to muddy the legal waters. Furthermore, a surprising number of witnesses came forward to speak of his character, of a different Raskolnikov from a time before his dark theory had consumed him. His friend Razumikhin, his former landlady, and even servants from his past recounted stories of his quiet generosity, of how he had once rescued 2 small children from a fire, and of how he had spent his last few rubles to support a destitute fellow student and his ailing father. The doctor, Zosimov, testified with calm, clinical authority that Raskolnikov had been suffering from a profound psychological malady, a form of monomania that left him not fully in control of his actions. All these things, taken together, painted a portrait not of a cold-blooded monster, but of a brilliant, proud, and compassionate young man who had been driven to a desperate act by poverty and mental illness, and the court sentences him not to the ultimate penalty, but to 8 years of penal servitude in the vast, frozen emptiness of Siberia. The fates of the other characters find their own quiet resolutions. Dunya and Razumikhin, their bond forged in the crucible of Raskolnikov's crisis, marry and begin a new life together. They are a portrait of practical, hopeful love, and they make plans to one day move to Siberia themselves, to be near the brother they have not abandoned. But for Raskolnikov's mother, Pulcheria Alexandrovna, there is no such happy ending. She never truly accepts the terrible truth of her son's actions. She exists in a state of anxious, feverish denial, creating elaborate fantasies about his departure and his future. Her mind, unable to bear the weight of the reality, slowly breaks, and she succumbs to her illness, passing away with her love for her brilliant lost son intact to the very end. Raskolnikov's own journey into his punishment begins. He is transported to the prison camp in Siberia, a cold, hard, and unforgiving world of forced labor and brutal simplicity. But it is here that the final, most profound irony of his story is revealed. He is in a physical prison, but he feels no remorse. His pride, the very intellectual arrogance that was the root of his crime, is still alive and well. He is not tormented by the lives he took. He is tormented by the stupidity of his own failure, by the weakness that led him to confess. He despises himself not for being a transgressor, but for being a failed transgressor. A pathetic louse who couldn't bear the weight of his own theory. He looks at the other convicts, the simple thieves and perpetrators, and he feels nothing but contempt for them. And they, in turn, despise him. They sense his intellectual superiority, his profound spiritual isolation, and they call him an infidel, a godless man. He is as alone in this crowded prison barracks as he ever was in his tiny St. Petersburg coffin. But he is not entirely alone. Sonia has followed him. She has kept her promise. She settles in the nearby town and becomes a quiet, angelic presence in the brutal world of the prison camp. She visits him on holidays, speaking to him through the fence, her face a mask of sad, gentle, and unwavering love. She writes letters home for the illiterate convicts. She brings them small comforts, and she becomes in their eyes a kind of saint, a little mother whose simple goodness is a beacon of light in their dark world. The other convicts adore her. They bow to her when she passes, but Raskolnikov, in his pride, is ashamed of her devotion. He is cold to her, cruel. He resents her unconditional love because he knows he has not earned it, and he cannot understand it. A year passes in this state of cold, unrepentant misery, and then he falls ill once more. It is another fever. But this time, the sickness brings not a nightmare of the past, but a terrifying vision of the future. He dreams of a new and terrible plague, a microscopic trichina that infects the very souls of men. Everyone who is infected immediately believes themselves to be the sole possessor of the absolute truth. Scientists, thinkers, leaders, all of them are convinced of their own infallible rightness, and they cannot agree on anything. On what is good or what is evil, on what to condemn or what to praise, society completely collapses. Armies march against each other for no reason. Men and women turn on each other in a essless, universal rage, and all of humanity, save for a few pure chosen souls, is on the brink of complete and total extinction. The dream is a perfect, terrifying allegory for his own intellectual disease, the plague of absolute certainty. The sickness of a single rational idea that places itself above all human compassion and all moral law is the very sickness that had infected him. His extraordinary man theory was his own personal trichina, and in the dream he sees its logical, horrifying endpoint. A world destroyed by the pride of infallible men, he awakens from the dream, shaken to his very core, his intellectual pride finally. Utterly and completely broken, he has seen the true face of his idea, and it is the face of the apocalypse. He recovers, and one evening he goes to the bank of the broad, empty river that flows beside the prison. It is a vast, open landscape, a world away from the cramped, claustrophobic streets of St. Petersburg. He sits on some old logs and looks out at the endless steppe, at the nomadic tents of the Kyrgyz people in the distance. A vision of an ancient, simple, and timeless world, and it is here that Sonia finds him. She sits down beside him, her face full of her usual, anxious love, and for a moment they are silent. And then something inside him finally gives way. He looks at her, and he sees not an object of his shame, but the source of his salvation, and with a cry he falls at her feet, clinging to her knees, and in that single profound moment of surrender, his heart finally opens, his pride dies, and he is resurrected by the simple, undeniable power of love. He understands, with a clarity that transcends all logic, that he loves her infinitely, and that it is only through her love that he can possibly begin to live again. The 7 years of his remaining sentence now seem like an eternity of bliss, a small price to pay for this newfound life. He has been reborn, not by a theory, not by an act of will, but by an act of grace. A love that he did not earn and does not deserve, but that has been given to him all the same. He later picks up the New Testament that she had left for him, the very same one that had belonged to the innocent Lizaveta, and he opens it for the first time, his own story. The story of his crime and punishment is over, but a new story, he knows, is just beginning. The story of a man's gradual regeneration, of his slow, painful, and miraculous passage from one world into another, a story that cannot yet be told. The theorist is dead, the transgressor has been judged, and on the banks of a lonely Siberian river, a new man, a man capable of love, of suffering, and of a new and incomprehensible life, has just been born.